Hello story enthusiasts, welcome to Savage Harry. Today we venture into what if Harry Potter married Daphne Greengrass and united two ancient houses. Your support means everything. Like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1, The Weight of What's Owed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry had always thought was the most forgettable day of the week, and so it seemed right that his life should lurch sideways on one. He was eating toast over the kitchen sink at Grimmauld Place, standing up, because the table was covered in maps he hadn't looked at in 3 weeks, and because sitting down for meals still felt like a thing people did when they had somewhere to be afterward. The owl dropped the envelope directly onto his plate, scattering crumbs, gave him a look of profound goblin bureaucratic disdain, and left without waiting for a reply. The seal was Gringotts, not the standard bronze embossing they used for account statements. The deep gold one, the one that meant come in person and mean it. Harry set down his toast, looked at the envelope for a moment, and then opened it. Mr. H.J. Potter, you are requested to present yourself at Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, at your earliest convenience, to finalize the outstanding matters pertaining to the estate of Sirius Black, deceased. Several items of a legally binding nature have come to light during the final audit of House Black holdings that require your immediate attention and formal acknowledgement. Bring identification. Bring a witness if you wish. Do not bring an orer. Ragnarok, Senior Estate Manager, Gringotts Bank. That last line, do not bring an orer, was doing a lot of work. Harry read it twice, folded the letter, and went to find his shoes. He didn't bring an orer. He considered bringing Hermione, but she was in Edinburgh at a magical law symposium she'd been talking about for 2 months, and he wasn't going to pull her out of something she'd earned because Gringotts was being mysterious. He thought about Ron, who was doing training rotations at the ministry 3 days a week, and had a look in his eyes lately when Harry called unexpectedly, not an unwelcoming look, just a slightly startled one, as though Ron was increasingly surprised to find that Harry's problems still had a habit of becoming everyone's problems. So Harry went alone, which was fine. He was good at alone. Diagon Alley in late September had the comfortable shabbiness of a marketplace past its summer rush. The rebuilding after the war was mostly done, though if you knew where to look you could still see patches of newer stone on older walls, places where spellwork had scorched down to the foundation, and someone had filled the gap with whatever was available. Harry walked past Madame Malkin's without stopping, past Flourish and Blots, past the ice cream parlor that had reopened under new management with cheerful yellow bunting that felt slightly too cheerful for a street that was still, 2 years on, figuring out what it was allowed to be. The goblins at the main entrance let him through without the usual tourist pageantry. One of them murmured something into a speaking tube, and within 30 seconds a junior goblin appeared to escort Harry not to a standard teller window, but to an elevator that went down rather than up, past the vaults, past the lower processing levels, and into a corridor Harry had never seen, stone-floored, lit by lamps that burned with a green-gold light, lined with doors of dark wood that had no handles. The room he was shown into had a fire going despite the time of year, a table big enough to seat 12 and exactly 3 occupants waiting for him. Ragnarok, Senior Estate Manager, presumably, sat at the head of the table. He was older than any goblin Harry had encountered, his face a geography of deliberate stillness, and he had the particular quality of someone who had seen centuries of human drama and had formed no opinion on any of it. On one side of the table sat a man Harry recognized, Eldest Greengrass. 50s, silver-haired, with the straight posture of old money and the careful eyes of someone who had spent the last 2 years very deliberately not ending up in Azkaban. Harry had seen him twice at ministry functions, and both times the man had given him a precise, measured nod, not sycophantic, not hostile, calculated. On the other side sat a young woman Harry did not know, and did not know how he didn't know, because she was not the kind of person you forgot. She was perhaps a year younger than him. Dark blonde hair pulled back with the sort of effortless precision that Harry knew from Hermione was not effortless at all. She wore deep green robes, nothing ostentatious, but the fabric was very good, and she was sitting with her hands folded on the table and her eyes on Harry with an expression so perfectly composed that it might as well have been a mask. Which Harry thought was interesting. People who were truly calm didn't need to perform it that hard. He knew the name from school, everyone knew the name. Daphne Greengrass, Slytherin, 2 years below him. The Ice Queen, her classmates called her, which was either a compliment or a warning depending on who was talking. She had stayed at Hogwarts during the final year while Harry was hunting Horcruxes, and he had absolutely no idea what that year had been like for her, and realized now that he had never thought to wonder. Mr. Potter. Ragnock gestured to the chair across from the Greengrasses. Thank you for coming promptly. Your letter was persuasive. Harry sat down. He looked at Ragnock, then at eldest Greengrass, then briefly at Daphne, who looked back at him with precisely no expression. What's this about? Ragnock opened the folder in front of him. The documents inside were old, visibly, tangibly old, the kind of parchment that had a texture history gave it. The estate of Sirius Black, Ragnock said, was considerably more complex than the initial inventory suggested. House Black maintained a number of instruments across several centuries that were placed in deep archive, accessible only upon the extinction or formal transfer of the house name. When you inherited the Black estate, Mr. Potter, you triggered the release of these archives. We have spent 14 months reviewing them. He paused. We found a contract. What kind of contract? A marriage contract, eldest Greengrass said. His voice was measured with the rounded vowels of old wizarding aristocracy. Executed in 1847 between Cygnus Black II and Horatio Greengrass. It established that in the event the Black line produced no direct male heir of appropriate standing, the inheritance of the house and its political alliances would pass through the heir designate, and that heir designate would be bound to formalize a union with the Greengrass line within 2 years of reaching majority. Harry looked at him, then at Ragnock. That's 170 years ago. Ancient contracts don't expire, Ragnock said, with the tone of someone who found human surprise at this fact slightly tiresome. They accrue. The magic bound into this instrument is not symbolic, it is structural. It is woven into the legal foundations of both House Black and House Greengrass. Attempting to void it without proper dissolution would create instabilities in both family vaults, lineage wards, and property holdings. How significant? Harry asked. House Greengrass would lose legal standing on 4 ancestral properties, Aldous said. And the Black estate which you currently hold would face a contestation clause that could see it challenged by any surviving Black-adjacent claimant. He let that sit for a moment. The Malfoys, for example. There it was. Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the fire. When you say heir designate and appropriate standing, how does that language apply to me? I'm not a Black by blood. You are by formal adoption, Ragnock said. Sirius Black formally named you heir under Goblin contract law 2 months before his death. We have the instrument. It was never registered with the Ministry. He didn't trust the Ministry at that point, which was, given the circumstances, reasonable, but Goblin contract law supersedes Ministry registration in matters of lineage and succession. You are legally and magically the heir of House Black. Harry was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Daphne Greengrass had not moved or spoken. And the Greengrass party, Harry said. Who's the designated party from your side? I am, Daphne said. Her voice was even, precise, and completely dry. The contract specifies the eldest daughter of the Greengrass line in the event no male heir of appropriate age exists. My father has one surviving brother who has no children. I have one younger sister. She unfolded her hands and placed them flat on the table. So it's me. Harry looked at her directly for the first time since sitting down. She met his gaze without difficulty, which most people couldn't manage, and he found he was revising his first impressions slightly. The mask was real, but there was something very alert behind it. You've read the contract? He asked. 3 times, and it's genuine, she said. I had my own expert review it. The magical signature is consistent with mid-Victorian binding spellwork. There are 17 separate verification markers and all of them authenticate. She tilted her head slightly. I wasn't hoping for a different answer, I was just being thorough. Harry turned back to Ragnock. What are the terms? Ragnock produced a second document. Formal betrothal to be publicly acknowledged within 60 days of the contract's discovery. Marriage to follow within 1 calendar year of betrothal. Cohabitation in the primary residence of the senior house, which would be House Black, within 30 days of betrothal announcement. The contract does not specify conditions of the marriage beyond its legal formalization. Meaning what exactly? Meaning, Daphne said before Ragnock could answer, that the contract requires us to be legally married. It does not specify that we have to like each other. She said it without inflection, but something in the phrasing felt more honest than anything else said in the room so far. Harry almost smiled. That's reassuring. I thought it might be. He picked up the document Ragnock had slid forward. It was dense, 14 pages of archaic wizarding legalese with margin annotations in what looked like 3 different hands across several generations. He read the key clauses twice, deliberately feeling both pairs of eyes on him and deciding he didn't particularly care. The thing was, and this was the part he would have found impossible to explain to Ron or Hermione or anyone who hadn't sat in a vault with him and tried to understand what 2 years post-war felt like, Harry didn't have a burning objection. That probably said something uncomfortable about his current state, but there it was. He'd spent the year after Voldemort's death doing exactly what everyone needed him to do: testifying at trials, shaking hands at ministry events, giving interviews to the prophet that he carefully controlled because Rita Skeeter had once again reinvented herself and was back, and being the symbol of victory for a world that needed one. He'd put off Auror training because every time he tried to think about what he actually wanted to do with his life, his mind produced nothing but white noise. He wasn't happy exactly, he wasn't unhappy, he was just waiting for what he genuinely didn't know. A marriage contract to a woman he didn't know, rooted in ancient magic he hadn't known existed, to protect two houses whose histories he was still learning. He set the document down. "If I say no," he said to Ragnock, "and we pursue dissolution, what's the actual timeline on the Malfoy challenge?" Lucius Malfoy's legal team filed a preliminary inquiry with Gringotts 6 weeks ago, Ragnock said, with the air of someone producing a card they had been holding for exactly this moment. "They appear to have been made aware of the contract through means we have not been able to confirm. The inquiry is currently paused, pending your response here today." Harry set the document down. "Of course they did. The inquiry alone isn't sufficient to trigger the challenge," Ragnock continued. "But if you decline the contract and pursue dissolution, it creates a legal window of approximately 4 to 6 months during which a challenge to the Black succession could be mounted. Given the Malfoy family's current political situation and their motivation to reclaim standing, they would use every day of that window." Harry looked across the table at eldest Greengrass, who was watching him with that same careful expression, not pressure exactly, but weight. The kind of look a man gave you when he was being very deliberate about not pushing. "Mr. Greengrass," Harry said, "what do you want out of this?" Aldous considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "My family's legal standing secured," he said finally. "My daughter treated with the respect her name and her own considerable qualities warrant, and an alliance that is real, not decorative." He paused. "I will not pretend I don't see advantages in a union between our houses. I will also not pretend that Daphne doesn't have her own voice in this matter, which is why she is here rather than home." Harry looked at Daphne, "And you," she held his gaze. "I want the same things my father said, minus the part where he called my qualities considerable, which I found embarrassing." Aldous made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "I want this to be functional," she continued. "I want us to be honest with each other about what this is and what it isn't. I want to not be a piece moved around a board without my consent, and I want to know that if this ends up being something it isn't yet, that's permitted." The last part was quietly said but precisely meant. Harry understood it immediately. She was giving him the same door she was keeping for herself. "The contract doesn't require us to like each other, but it doesn't forbid it either." He was quiet for long enough that the fire shifted and resettled. "I'll sign," he said. Ragnock had the quill ready. The paperwork took 2 hours because Goblin contract law had a very particular relationship with redundancy, and Ragnock read every clause aloud before they signed it. By the time it was done, Harry's hand ached and the fire had burned lower, and the formal, slightly surreal quality of the afternoon had settled into something more mundane. They emerged from Gringotts into the early evening, Diagon Alley gone amber and long-shadowed. Aldous Greengrass shook Harry's hand with both of his, warm but not excessive, and said he would have his solicitor contact Harry's regarding the formal announcement. Then he looked at his daughter, and something passed between them that Harry wasn't meant to read, and he left in the direction of the leaky cauldron with the measured step of a man who trusted the person he was leaving behind. Harry and Daphne stood on the steps of Gringotts. "Do you want to get a coffee?" Harry said. She blinked. It was, he noted, the first crack in the composure, not in a bad way, just genuine surprise at the ordinariness of the offer. "After we just signed a marriage contract. I don't know about you, but I could use something warm and not magically binding." She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "Fine." They ended up at a small cafe at the Diagon Alley end of Horizon Alley that Harry had found 6 months ago specifically because nobody recognized him there. The owner, a former ministry cartographer named Elspeth, was more interested in her enchanted map collection than in the tabloids, and the coffee was the best in Wizarding London. Harry ordered an Americano. Daphne ordered a black tea, evaluated the menu with the same focused attention she'd given the contract, and added a slice of the almond cake. Harry found that unexpectedly endearing and said nothing about it. They sat across from each other in the corner booth, and for a few minutes neither of them tried to fill the silence, which Harry found more comfortable than he'd expected. "How much did you know?" he asked eventually. "Before Ragnock's letter. My father told me 3 days ago. He knew for a week before that." She turned her teacup in her hands. "He didn't want to tell me until he'd confirmed it independently. He knows I prefer having something solid to look at rather than a theory to worry about." She paused. How much did you know? Nothing until this morning. She looked up. Nothing. They didn't give you any warning at all. The letter this morning said come in person and don't bring an aura. That was the preview. He drank his coffee. Goblins have a particular sense of theater. That seems, she said carefully, like it would be quite a lot to absorb. I've had worse Tuesdays. He said it without drama, which made her press her lips together briefly as though deciding whether or not to ask. She decided not to, which he appreciated. Most people couldn't let a comment like that sit. You were in Slytherin your 7th year, he said. When things were bad. It wasn't quite a question, she understood it anyway. Yes. How was it? A pause. She looked at him steadily, and he could see her deciding how honest to be, and then deciding that there was very little point in starting this particular arrangement with a social performance. Survivable, she said. I spent that year making myself as invisible as possible, which in Slytherin under Snape's nominal leadership with the carrots running roughshod, meant being very precise about who you were and weren't seen with, and never, ever giving anyone a reason to single you out. She picked up her fork and cut a piece of the almond cake. Pansy was a problem. She had a talent for aligning herself with authority regardless of what that authority was. Draco was somewhere between miserable and terrified and trying not to show either, which made him unpredictable. She ate the cake. Most of us were just trying to get through the year. And Astoria, something warm moved through her expression before she contained it, like a lamp being briefly uncovered. She was 2 years below me. I spent significant energy making sure she was untouchable. The younger students who weren't from Death Eater families were the most at risk. A pause. She's better at pretending to be harmless than I am. She used it better, Harry nodded. He understood that kind of protective calculation. The math you did when someone's smaller and more vulnerable was depending on you. She sounds like she'd have gotten on with Neville, he said. Daphne considered. They'd either be great friends or mutually infuriating within an hour. I genuinely can't predict which. That's exactly what getting along with Neville is like. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost, and he filed it away as a data point. I should ask, she said, about Grimmauld Place, since apparently I'll be living there. I should warn you about it, he said. It's better than it was. Hermione and Mrs. Weasley spent most of the first year after the war doing a renovation that I contributed to mainly by moving furniture when directed and staying out of the way otherwise. He paused. Creature is there. House elf very old, significantly improved in temperament since the war, but he has his moments. I grew up with house elves, she said without any particular emphasis. I know how to respect them. That's, yeah, good. He hadn't been sure and he'd wanted to raise it, and he was glad he had. There's a library. It's extensive. It was Sirius's family's collection, which means there are some things in there I'm still not entirely sure are legal, but most of it is just old. The kitchen is good. The garden is a project. There's a room on the 3rd floor that I haven't opened because the last time I tried it growled. It growled steadily for about 40 seconds and then stopped. I put a sealing charm on it and haven't revisited the question. Daphne looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely place. You've been living alone in a house with a room that growls. I have, and you just left it. I had other things going on. She was quiet for a moment. I'll open it, she said. Looked at her. You'll open the room that growls. Yes, she finished her tea. I'm better at that sort of thing than you are probably. You don't know that. I grew up in Slytherin, she said, the first trace of something sharp and comfortable at once in her voice. We had a room in our common room that hummed for 3 years before anyone figured out it was a rogue resonance ward from 1923. I was the one who found it. I was 14. She set down her cup. I'll open the room. Harry looked at her, this precise, composed, quietly confident young woman who had just agreed to marry him under an ancient contract and was now informing him she'd be solving the house's architectural mysteries, and did both of these things with an equal, unhurried practicality, and thought, all right, maybe this is going to be interesting. Fine, he said, but if it growls at you, I'm going to say I told you so. I'll accept those terms. He walked her to the flue at the leaky cauldron afterward, because it seemed like the right thing to do even if neither of them was sure what the correct etiquette for their situation was yet. The pub was half full, Tuesday evening drinkers and a table of aurors from the nearby ministry field office who were deep in paperwork and complaining about it. At the flue she turned to face him. Whatever ease the cafe had built was still there, but thinner now. They were back to being two people who had made a significant decision and were now standing on the edge of its reality. 60 days to the formal announcement, she said. Right. I'd like to meet at Grimmauld Place before that, see the space. Start sorting out what this looks like practically. I can do that. When works for you? Saturday, no hesitation. She'd already been thinking about it. Saturday, he agreed. She nodded, then she said, for what it's worth, I didn't sign that contract because I was obligated to. My father would have found another way if I'd wanted him to. The legal problems were real, but they were solvable given enough time and gold. She held his gaze. I signed because it seemed worth finding out. He held her gaze back. Same. She stepped into the flue, said Greengrass manner in her clear, measured voice, and was gone in a curl of green flame. Harry stood there for a moment in the warm, slightly stale pub air, and felt something strange in his chest, not anxiety, not the dread he'd half expected on the walk to Gringotts this morning. Something more like a door being opened. He walked home to Grimmauld Place, hands in his pockets, watching the evening settle over London like a held breath finally released. He owled Hermione that night. Not the full story, just something came up with the Black estate. Big. I'll explain properly when you're back. I'm all right. He knew she would read I'm all right and understand it meant it's complicated but I'm not in danger, which was their shorthand from years of insufficient communication in high-pressure situations. She responded within 20 minutes because she was Hermione. How big is big? Are we talking paperwork big or world-ending big? Paperwork big. Ancient, legally binding paperwork. A longer pause this time. Then Harry, what did you do? Technically I didn't do anything. The goblins did something. I just signed, you signed something. He put the parchment down because continuing this conversation was going to require actually explaining it and he needed to sleep first. He wrote Saturday, come over Saturday, bring Ron, I'll make lunch. This was code for I'm going to need the people who will absolutely have opinions about this but will also be in my corner regardless. He trusted that she understood. The rest of the week was quiet. He went through the Black Library with fresh eyes on Wednesday, pulling anything that mentioned contract law, house alliances, or the Greengrass family. There was more than he expected, old correspondences, a formal letter of agreement from 1847, in what he now recognized as a Cygnus Black handwriting that matched the signature on the contract, and a slim volume on the theory of ancient house alliance magic that had Sirius's grandmother's name on the inside cover with 3 furious annotations in the margins arguing with the author about lineage sorcery. The annotations were, Harry thought, more informative than the text. He found himself thinking about Daphne Greengrass at odd moments, not in a sentimental way, just in the way you thought about something new that had arrived in your life and needed organizing. She was not what he'd expected, though he hadn't been entirely sure what he'd expected. The Ice Queen reputation hadn't prepared him for the almond cake or for the steadiness of her logic or for the way she'd said I signed because it seemed worth finding out with no performance behind it at all. He thought about that more than the rest of it. On Thursday, Creature materialized at his elbow while Harry was reading and said without preamble, Master is redecorating. I'm not redecorating. Master has moved the books around and put fresh sheets on the second guest bedroom and is looking at the garden. Those aren't, Harry stopped. How do you know I put fresh sheets on the guest room? Creature looked at him with the ancient patience of a being who had served the Black family for over a century and had in that time developed a very complete picture of human self-deception. Will the young mistress be requiring anything particular? Creature can prepare specific provisions. She's not the I don't know yet, I'll find out Saturday. Creature nodded as though this confirmed something he had already known. Creature will prepare the good breakfast things, he said and disappeared. Harry looked at the spot where the house elf had been and decided not to think too hard about that. Saturday came with actual September light, warm through the kitchen windows, the kind of morning that London offered occasionally as if to prove it could. Harry had the kitchen clean and food on by 9. At 10 past, the flue lit up and Hermione stepped through first, followed by Ron, who had half a piece of toast still in his hand and the expression of someone who had been told the bare minimum on the way over. Right, Hermione said before Harry had fully said hello. Tell me, he told them. All of it: Ragnar's letter, the vault room, Ragnar's carefully timed revelation about the Malfoy inquiry, Aldous Greengrass's measured presentation of the situation, Daphne's even more measured self-presentation. The cafe, the conversation, the signing. When he finished, Ron ate the last of his toast slowly. So you're engaged, he said. To Daphne Greengrass, Hermione added in the tone of someone running calculations very quickly. Yes to both of those things. The Slytherin Ice Queen, Ron said. From school, she's not actually, Harry stopped. The Ice Queen thing is a reputation. I think it was protective. Both of them looked at him. He realized he'd defended her quite quickly. I met her for 4 hours, he said. She was direct and logical and she signed the contract because she chose to, not because she had to. Hermione was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant she was processing something significant. Then she said, the Malfoy angle worries me. It should worry all of us. Lucius is supposed to be politically finished, Ron said. The trial, he kept his freedom, Harry said. He kept enough gold and enough old favors to matter. And he has Draco's near rejection of the family name eating at him. He'd thought about this over the past few days. He's not finished, he's just repositioning. You having the Black estate cements your political and magical standing in a way that specifically blocks what he could rebuild, Hermione said slowly. The Malfoys were always close to the Blacks. If he could challenge your succession, he gets a seat at the table again, Harry finished. Yes, so the contract isn't just personally convenient, Hermione said, it's strategically significant. 2 houses, Harry said, Black and Greengrass, both ancient, both carrying seats in the Wisengamot. United, they represent a political bloc, Hermione said, and something lit up in her eyes that Harry knew was her brain engaging with the architecture of it. That's not nothing, Harry, that's actually quite large. I know, are you going to use it? Ron asked, simple question, completely direct. That was what Harry loved about Ron, he cut straight to the thing. Harry looked at him. If I need to. Do you need to? Harry thought about Lucius Malfoy's legal team filing a preliminary inquiry 6 weeks ago. He thought about 2 years of ministry functions where men like that had stood in corners and watched him and smiled with their mouths. He thought about the annotated book with the furious margin notes and the contract that had sat in a vault for 170 years waiting for exactly this moment. Probably, he said. Yeah. The flue chimed. They all turned. Creature already moving called from the corridor. The young mistress is arriving. Hermione's eyebrows went up. Ron straightened. Harry stood up from the table, and a moment later Daphne Greengrass stepped through the flue in gray robes and an expression of someone who had prepared herself to be examined and had decided to find it mildly amusing. She looked at the 2 of them, Hermione's sharp, evaluating gaze, Ron's careful, uncertain one, and then she looked at Harry. And something in the look said, "Your people, I take it." He nodded slightly, her chin lifted slightly in acknowledgement. "Hermione Granger," she said, turning to Hermione directly. "Your paper on the legal inconsistencies in the Beast Being Classification Act was discussed at my mother's last dinner party, favorably for what it's worth." Hermione blinked. It was published in a fairly limited circulation journal. My mother has specific interests, she found it thorough." Daphne moved to the table without waiting for an invitation and sat down across from Hermione. "I'm going to need the names of whoever you're using for wizarding contract law. I have my own solicitor, but I want someone who reads this kind of ancient binding work specifically." "I know someone," Hermione said, and the calculation in her eyes was shifting toward something more like respect. Ron leaned over to Harry. "She's not what I expected," he said very quietly. "No," Harry agreed. From across the table without turning, Daphne said, "You're louder than you think, Weasley." Ron went slightly red. Harry covered his mouth. Daphne poured herself a cup of tea from the pot Creature had left on the table, and for the first time since Harry had met her she was something other than composed. She was comfortable, settled. As though she'd looked at the shape of this place and these people and decided it would do. It was such a small thing, but it was the first real thing he'd seen. He sat back down, refilled his own cup, and listened to Hermione begin asking Daphne questions that no one else would have thought of, and Daphne answer all of them with the unhurried precision that was. Harry was beginning to understand just the way her mind worked. The September morning held its warmth. Creature brought more toast. Outside, the garden Harry kept meaning to fix was doing something quietly hopeful in the sunlight. And somewhere in Wiltshire, Harry thought, Lucius Malfoy was readjusting his calculations. Let him. Chapter 2, The Serpent and the Lion. The announcement went out on a Wednesday morning, which meant by Wednesday afternoon the Prophet had managed to rearrange its entire front page. Lead with a photograph taken by some enterprising photographer who'd been lurking near Gringotts on Tuesday of last week, and had caught Harry and Daphne walking out together, and construct a headline that managed to be both breathless and completely inaccurate simultaneously. Harry Potter and Daphne GRE and GRASS, Secret Romance or Calculated Alliance? Harry read it at the kitchen table with his coffee and felt a deep, particular exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. The photograph was actually decent. They were mid-step, him slightly ahead, her slightly to the side, both of them with the focused expressions of people who had just done something significant and were thinking about the next thing. Rita Skeeter's byline was at the top. Of course it was. Sources close to the Greengrass family confirm that a betrothal agreement has been formally filed with Gringotts Bank, uniting the ancient and noble House of Black, currently held by famed war hero Harry Potter, with the ancient and noble House of Greengrass in what some are calling the most significant political marriage in a generation. Miss Greengrass, 19, known to her Hogwarts peers as the Ice Queen of Slytherin, was unavailable for comment. Mr. Potter, 20, was also unavailable for comment, which is rapidly becoming his defining characteristic. He set the paper down. That last bit was vintage Skeeter, technically an observation, functionally a dig. He poured more coffee. Creature appeared at his elbow. Several owls have arrived. Master has received 43 pieces of correspondence since 6 this morning. I know, Creature has sorted them into 3 categories: congratulations, which are mostly political, outrage, which are mostly political in the other direction, and 17 letters from publications requesting statements. Bin the publication requests, stack the rest. Harry looked at the photograph again. It was strange seeing himself in a photograph where he wasn't doing anything heroic, just walking, just existing in proximity to another person. Creature, what do you know about the Greengrass family from the old days when Sirius was young? Creature was quiet for a moment, which meant he was deciding what was worth saying. The Greengrasses were always careful, he said finally. Not cold, careful. They maintained their positions without making enemies they couldn't afford and without compromising what they actually believed. Aldous Greengrass's father was known for it. It skipped a generation. Aldous' older brother was foolish and then came back. He paused. The first daughter is like the grandfather. Creature has heard enough to form a view. From who? Old houses talk, Creature said, which was not a specific answer and was intended not to be. He collected the coffee pot and left. Harry looked at the stack of owls, 43 letters in less than a morning. He thought about the 60-day announcement window they'd been given, which they had used all of. They'd filed on day 58, having spent the intervening time putting things in order. Daphne had come to Grimmauld Place 4 times in those 2 months. She'd opened the Growling Room. It had contained a misfired expansion charm from approximately 1952 that had folded a small section of space in on itself, creating a resonance loop that produced the low growl whenever the temperature dropped below a certain point. She had located it, diagnosed it, and dissolved it in about 90 minutes, then come downstairs and accepted the cup of tea Harry had made her with the precise satisfaction of someone who had expected to solve it and had. He had not said "I told you so" because the sound it had made upon dissolving, a long, settling groan like a ship finding calm water, was actually quite impressive. She had also reorganized the library. Not dramatically, she'd left his reading stack exactly where it was, but she'd identified 3 shelves of material that needed specific preservation charms to stop deteriorating, 2 books that were incorrectly shelved, and had been cross-referencing each other's protections in a way that was creating a magical feedback nobody had noticed. And 1 slim volume written in runes that she'd taken to the kitchen table and spent 2 evenings translating before pronouncing it a moderately interesting historical text about ward construction rather than anything dangerous. She had done all of this with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who wasn't performing helpfulness but was genuinely interested in problems. Harry had found her at 2 in the morning once, sitting in the library with one of Sirius's grandmother's books, a cup of cold tea she'd forgot to drink, and a notepad covered in her small, precise handwriting. "The library doesn't keep banker's hours," he'd said from the doorway. She'd looked up without startlement. "Neither does interesting reading." He'd gone downstairs, made fresh tea, brought it back. She'd said thank you without looking up from the page. He'd sat in the chair across from her and read his own book. Neither of them had felt the need to do anything else with the hour. They weren't friends yet, but they were something. The word for it hadn't arrived yet. Daphne arrived at Grimmauld Place at noon on Wednesday with her personal owl delivering 47 of her own letters ahead of her and an expression of controlled irritation that Harry was learning to recognize as her version of exasperated. "Rita Skeeter," she said as she stepped through the flue. "I know, Ice Queen of Slytherin." She had to reach back 6 years for that one. To be fair, she had 12 hours from announcement to publication. She worked fast. Daphne set her bag down with more force than necessary. "She called my unavailability notable. I was in the shower. She called my unavailability my defining characteristic, so..." Daphne stopped. Then she said, "That's actually funny," and the irritation in her face shifted to something more sardonic. "She's not wrong about that, is she? You have a gift for being maddeningly difficult to pin down." "Years of practice," Harry said. "Tea, please." They sat in the kitchen, their default meeting point because the library was for working and the sitting room felt formal, and went through the correspondence together. Daphne had already sorted hers with annotations. She slid her stack across to Harry so he could see the categorization, and he recognized with some amusement that it was almost identical to Creature's system. "Wisengamot members?" he asked, noting a separate sub-stack. 8 formal acknowledgements. 3 of those are explicit requests to meet. They want to understand what a United Potter Greengrass block means for their own positions before they decide how to respond publicly. She tapped the stack. "That's actually fast. They usually take longer to react." "Who are the 3 requesting meetings?" Marchbanks, Ogden. Surprisingly, I would have expected him to wait and see. And a woman called Vance who I don't know personally but my father respects. Emmeline Vance's sister, Harry said. Rosalind, she took the seat after Emmeline died. He paused. I'll meet with all three but not immediately, let them wait a week. Daphne looked at him steadily. You've thought about this. I've had 2 months to think about it. He refilled his mug. When Sirius left me the estate, I didn't really grasp what it meant politically. I thought it was mostly the house and the gold and the name. Hermione has spent 6 months explaining to me that I was wrong about that. She's remarkably thorough, Daphne said, and it was not criticism. She genuinely enjoys it, Harry said. The legal architecture of wizarding society is exactly the kind of problem she finds satisfying. She maps it like you'd map a battlefield. Daphne nodded slowly. I'd like to work with her on the Wisengamot angle if she's willing. My knowledge of current political alignments is good, but her understanding of the legal mechanics is better than anyone I've encountered outside of a professional context. She'll say yes immediately and pretend to consider it for 30 seconds to be polite, Harry said. Daphne almost smiled. She was doing that more. I can work with that. The owl post brought 3 more letters while they sat there. One of them was from the ministry, not Kingsley directly but his office, which was Kingsley being careful. It expressed congratulations on behalf of the minister and the hope that the newly united houses would continue to contribute to the reconstruction of Wizarding Britain in the spirit of cooperation and progress. What does he actually want? Daphne asked, reading over Harry's shoulder. To know whose side we're on. What will you tell him? Harry set the letter down. That we're on the side of whatever's actually right. He paused, which is either going to reassure him or terrify him. Probably both, she said. People in positions of maintained power find principled positions destabilizing. You sound like you've seen it before. She was quiet for a moment. My father spent the war years walking a line so fine that most people couldn't see it. He never joined Voldemort's movement. He never actively resisted it. He maintained his family's safety and his political neutrality and told himself it was strategy. She said it without obvious emotion, just the measured honesty he'd come to expect from her. He spent the last 2 years deciding whether it was. I think he's concluded it was necessary but not something he's proud of. The contract, the alliance, it's partly how he tries to make that calculation come out differently in retrospect. Harry was quiet with that for a moment. And you, what do you think of how he handled it? She met his gaze. I think he kept us alive and whole. I think other choices might have been more heroic and also more likely to get Astoria killed. A pause. I don't think it was easy for him to choose the option that was survivable rather than the one that was right. I give him credit for not pretending it was. That's honest, Harry said. I'm trying to be. Something in the way she said it, not performing honesty but actively choosing it as if it required effort and she was willing to put in the effort anyway, landed somewhere specific in his chest. The owl post arrived again. This one had a Malfoy crest. They both looked at it without touching it. It'll be Lucius, Daphne said. Almost certainly. Whatever it says, it'll be perfectly polite, she said. He's too smart to be openly hostile when we have the upper hand. Harry picked up the letter, broke the seal, unfolded it. He was right. Lucius Malfoy's handwriting was elegant, controlled, and cold as deep water. Mr. Potter, Miss Greengrass, please accept my sincere congratulations on your forthcoming union. The joining of 2 such distinguished houses is an occasion worthy of celebration, and I have no doubt that your combined legacy will contribute significantly to the continued restoration of our world. I hope we might find occasion to speak at some point in the coming months. There's much to discuss regarding the shared history of our families, and I believe we might find common ground on matters of mutual interest. With warmest regards, Lucius Malfoy. Harry read it twice. Then he handed it to Daphne, who read it once, set it down, and said, He's finding out how we'll react. Yes. He'll have 3 or 4 different responses prepared for whatever we send back, each one calibrated to a different read of our intentions. She tapped the letter. He's very good at this. I know. Harry looked at the letter. What would you send? She thought for a moment. Nothing that commits to anything. A polite acknowledgement that leaves every possible interpretation open, written in a way that sounds warm while containing no actual warmth. She paused. Or nothing at all, which sends its own message. Nothing, Harry said. Send nothing. She looked at him. That's aggressive from a social standpoint. It's essentially refusing the hand extended. Good, he met her eyes. He knows we know about the Gringotts inquiry. He knows the contract was partly a response to his move. Pretending we're starting from a neutral position would insult both our intelligences and his. He pushed the letter aside. He respects power. The only thing that'll actually make him cautious is seeing it wielded without apology. Daphne looked at him for a long moment, and he had the distinct impression she was revising a calculation about him. Then she nodded once. All right. The move-in was technically complete by the end of the first week of the announcement. Practically, Daphne had been effectively living at Grimmauld Place more days than not for the past month. She had a room on the second floor, third from the left, which she had quietly and efficiently made livable in a way that was distinct from Harry's general approach to rooms, which was mostly does it have a bed and a surface for books, good. Her room had good curtains and a small desk with her own lamp and a very specific arrangement of personal items that Harry hadn't looked at closely because it wasn't his business, but which had the quality of being chosen rather than accumulated. The first full week of official cohabitation was fine, mostly fine. They had worked out the logistics with the same methodical competence they'd brought to everything else. Breakfast was individual, done when you woke up, no expectations. Dinner was usually together, not because the contract required it but because they'd both found they didn't hate the company. The library was shared. The ground floor study was Harry's for now, because Daphne had set up her working space in the corner of the library and didn't seem to need a separate room for it. Kreacher treated Daphne with the particular formal warmth he reserved for people who had treated him correctly, which Harry considered the highest available endorsement. It was Thursday of the second week when things became less fine. Harry was coming back from a meeting at the Ministry, one of the endless, procedurally tedious follow-up sessions regarding Death Eater asset seizures that an Auror case manager had roped him into as a witness, when he felt it before he saw it. The ward signature on Grimmauld Place was wrong. It was subtle, nothing most people would notice, but Harry had spent 2 years learning to trust the physical sensation of a magical space in distress, and this was exactly that feeling low in his sternum like a tuning fork struck on a slightly wrong note. He didn't run. He moved fast and kept his hand near his wand and came through the front door with his eyes already scanning. The entrance hall was fine. The ground floor was fine. Then he heard voices from upstairs. He took the stairs 2 at a time and found Daphne in the corridor outside the room that had formerly growled, facing 2 men he had never seen. They were not Ministry, their robes were unmarked and too well made, the kind of expensive plain that meant private service. One of them had a hand up as though he'd been making a point. The other one had a document case that he was holding like it was a shield. Daphne was standing with her arms folded and her weight balanced with the particular stillness of someone who had already decided how this was going to go and was waiting for the other parties to catch up. "Mr. Potter," she said without turning, "these gentlemen say their property assessors contracted by a third party to conduct a survey of the Black Estate's structural magical integrity. They arrived 20 minutes ago. I've been keeping them company." Harry looked at the men. "Who contracted you?" The one with the document case said, "I'm afraid we're not at liberty to disclose our clients." "What firm?" Harry said, not loudly, just clearly, a pause. "Calloway and Brightmore." Harry knew the name because Hermione had given him a list. Calloway and Brightmore was a specialist magical property firm used almost exclusively by a small number of old money clients. One of those clients specifically was currently on his list of people to watch. "How did you get past the front wards?" Harry asked. "The outer wards on this property were modified," Harry finished. "No, they weren't. I checked them personally and Kreacher checks them daily. Try again." The man with the raised hand, more senior, Harry thought, by the way the other one kept almost looking at him, said, "Mr. Potter, I understand this seems irregular, but our mandate is entirely legal under Section 14 of the Magical Property." "I know what Section 14 says," Daphne cut in, and her voice had the temperature of deep winter. "Section 14 allows assessment of disputed properties in the context of active legal challenge." "There is no active legal challenge to this property. The preliminary inquiry filed 6 weeks ago was suspended upon execution of the Gringotts contract, which means your mandate does not exist, and you have entered this property without legal sanction." Both men were quiet. "In addition," she continued, "you enter without the consent of either of the property's recognized occupants, which under the Boundaries and Dwelling Act of 1973 constitutes unlawful magical trespass. That carries a Ministry fine, and more significantly immediately voids any information gathered during the trespass from use in any future legal proceeding." She tilted her head. "So whatever you came here to document, you can't use it." The senior man's jaw was doing something complicated. Harry looked at them with an expression he'd learned from 2 years of Death Eater trials, which was, "I have all the time in the world and none of the patience." "I'd like you to leave," he said. "Right now before I call the Aurors, and we can all avoid the part where this becomes a formal incident in the Ministry record. Mr. Potter, if you just allow us to complete." "Kreacher," Harry said. The house elf appeared at the end of the corridor with the silent promptness of someone who had been waiting nearby. He looked at the two men with the expression of someone who had removed far worse from this house over a century of service, and considered this only moderately challenging. The men left quickly. Harry waited until he heard the front door close and then leaned against the wall and let out a slow breath. "How did they get in?" he asked. "A borrowed residual access code," Daphne said. "It was in the ward signature. Whoever sent them had access to an old Black family entry method. Something from before you inherited and reset the outer wards. They probably assumed the inner signature would still match." She uncrossed her arms. It almost worked. "The outer wards let them through. The inner wards flagged them and locked down the upper floors, which is why they were stuck in the corridor." "You set that up." "I modified the inner ward configuration 2 weeks ago. I didn't mention it because it seemed premature to explain my reasoning, and also because I wasn't sure I was right." A pause. "I was right." Harry looked at her. The adrenaline was ebbing and what replaced it was something more considered. She had seen the gap, a possible intrusion vector, a weakness in the security configuration of a house she'd only been living in for weeks, and quietly filled it without drama, without making it about her own cleverness. She just fixed it because it needed fixing. "Thank you," he said. "We should talk to Ragnarok," she said. "If they had a residual access code, it came from someone who either had it legitimately before you inherited or found it in old Black family papers." She looked at him steadily. "That's a short list." "Malfoy," Harry said, "almost certainly." She started walking toward the stairs. "And it means he's not waiting to see how we respond to his letter. He's already moving." Harry fell into step beside her. "You're not rattled," he observed. "Would it help if I were? Number, then I'm not." She glanced at him sideways. "Are you?" He thought about it honestly. He'd felt the ward wrongness in his chest and moved on it, and now he was thinking about the next thing. "No," he said, "I'm annoyed." "That's different." "Good," she said. "Annoyed is useful, rattled isn't." They owled Hermione and were on the flu with Ragnarok within 2 hours. Ragnarok listened to the account of the ward access incident with the particular attentiveness of a goblin being given information about a security breach in one of his bank's associated properties, which meant he was furious in a very still way. "We will conduct an audit of the access codes associated with the Black estate holdings," he said, in a tone that boded nothing good for whoever had leaked that code. "The preliminary inquiry filed by Calloway and Brightmore on behalf of an unnamed client is already on record. This incident will be added to that file. If a formal challenge is mounted, it will be attempted with a documented history of procedurally irregular conduct." "Which weakens the challenge," Daphne said. "Considerably," Ragnarok confirmed. "What's the earliest Lucius could file a formal challenge?" Harry asked. Ragnarok considered. "A formal succession challenge to an ancient house requires filing through the Wisengamot, not simply through Gringotts. It requires a minimum of 3 Wisengamot members to sponsor the challenge, a documented legal basis, and a 30-day notice period. The earliest I would expect, given the pace of his current moves, is 6 to 8 weeks. Which gave them 6 to 8 weeks to consolidate. "Ragnarok," Harry said, "I want to make the House Black seat on the Wisengamot active." Ragnarok looked at him with what might have been approval. "The seat has been dormant since your godfather's incarceration. Activating it requires your formal appearance and a registration of intent with the chamber. I'll do it next week." "And the House Greengrass seat?" Ragnarok asked, his eyes moving to Daphne. "My father holds that seat," she said. "But he's been attending inconsistently. I'll speak with him." She paused. "If the betrothal documents are correctly filed, my own standing is elevated within the House as heir formal. I can attend sessions as proxy. I'll have the paperwork prepared," Ragnarok said, and this time what was in his expression was absolutely appreciation. Goblins respected someone who had done their reading. When the flu call ended, Hermione, who had arrived during the call and been sitting to the side taking notes, looked up from her parchment. "You two work fast. We don't have the option of working slowly," Harry said. "Number," she looked between them. "Lucius is going to escalate. Sending property assessors into your house is a test as much as it is a tactic. He wants to know how you'll respond to pressure. How fast, how decisively, what resources you'll draw on." "Then he got his answer," Daphne said. Hermione almost smiled. "Yes, he did." She tapped her notes. "There's something else. I've been researching the specific law that would underpin a succession challenge. There's a clause, Section 7, subsection C of the Ancient Houses Preservation Act that's rarely invoked but has precedent. It allows a challenge to be mounted not just on grounds of disputed succession, but on grounds that a binding contract between houses was executed under false pretenses or with fraudulent magical authentication." Harry and Daphne both went still. "He's going to try to say the contract is fake," Harry said. or that the authentication is flawed, or that one of the parties lacked proper standing at the time of execution. Hermione set her quill down. He won't win. The goblin authentication is solid, and Ragnarok would appear as a witness, which no Wisengamot is going to dismiss. But the process of challenging it creates a legal gray period during which your standing is technically in question. During which period, Daphne said slowly, other political actors might feel emboldened to treat us as less stable than we are. Exactly, Hermione said. Harry was quiet for a moment. The fire had burned down without anyone adding wood. The kitchen was getting cold in the particular Grimmauld Place way. The house was old enough that the cold came in through history as much as through gaps in the walls. Then we need to make sure, he said, that by the time he files anything our standing is so consolidated that the legal gray period has no actual effect. That means the Wisengamot seat. That means the meetings with Marchbanks and Ogden and Vance. That means the social dimension, too. The winter solstice gathering, Daphne said. She said it as though she'd been thinking about it for a while. Harry looked at her. The winter solstice gathering was the significant social event of the wizarding calendar, held annually at the Great Hall of the Wisengamot, attended by every family of consequence, and thoroughly reported by every wizarding publication. He had attended twice since the war and spent both evenings being navigated around the room by ministry officials who wanted to make use of him. You want to attend together, he said. I want us to walk in together in full house formal dress as a united front before Lucius has time to file anything. She met his eyes. The social acknowledgement of the alliance matters as much as the legal one. People need to see it to believe it's real. Ron, who had been leaning in the kitchen doorway listening with the expression of someone watching a chess match being played very quickly, said, That's in 3 weeks. Yes, Daphne said. You think you can? He stopped and reconsidered. Right, you've already thought about what to wear. I've thought about a great many things, she said with the particular dry composure that Harry was starting to realize was her version of humor. The dress was not the first consideration, but yes. Ron looked at Harry. I like her, he said with simple sincerity. Harry looked at Daphne, who had turned toward the window with the slightest tinge of surprise on her face, as if she hadn't expected it and didn't quite know what to do with it. Don't tell her that, Harry said. She'll find a way to use it strategically. I'm right here, she said. I know. The Wisengamot registration happened on Monday. Harry went alone, which was a deliberate choice. Daphne had suggested it, and she was right, as she had an aggravating tendency to be. This was a moment that needed to read as personal rather than political. A man claiming his seat rather than a power block announcing itself. He walked into the chamber anteroom in clean, simple robes, not flashy, not ostentatious, just correct, and registered his intent to activate the Black family seat with the clerk, a man of 60 who had worked in the chamber for 30 years and had seen everything. The clerk looked at the name, looked at Harry, and for just a moment lost his professional neutrality. House Black, the clerk said. Dormant since 1995. Yes, Harry said. The seat is in the second tier, fourth from the left. Thank you. He found the seat. He sat in it for 60 seconds, which was all the formal registration required. The wood was dark and old, and the carving on the back showed the Black family crest, the old motto, Tauger's Purr, which Harry had decided he would deal with at some point, since the seat's magic had to hold the name regardless of his opinion of the motto. The chamber was empty at this hour, and his footsteps had echoed going in, and he sat in the enormous quiet and thought, this is a real thing now. This is a real thing that I am holding. He wasn't afraid of it. He was awake to it, in a way he hadn't been to much of anything for a while. He stood up, thanked the clerk on his way out, and walked back through the ministry atrium with the particular feeling of a man who has picked something heavy up and found that it's lighter than he expected. His communication mirror beeped. He pulled it out, a small two-way mirror Hermione had modified. He had one, she had one, Daphne now had a third, and Daphne's face looked back at him. How did it go? She asked. Fine, he said. Quiet. Good quiet or ominous quiet? Good quiet. He paused. The seat is in the second tier. I know, I looked it up. A pause. My father is coming to dinner Friday. He wants to meet with us both formally, the 3 Wisengamot members who requested meetings. He thinks he can arrange introductions through existing relationships to smooth things before the official meetings. She tilted her head. He's more invested in this alliance than I initially thought. Is that a problem? She was quiet for a moment. He's good at this, and his motivations are genuine even if they're complicated. Another pause, and this one had a different quality, not hesitant, just considered. He told me something when I went home Sunday. He said he always hoped when the contract came to light that it would be someone worth the alliance. He said he thinks it is. Harry was in the middle of the ministry atrium, mirrors and reflective floors all around him, ministry workers flowing past, and he felt something warm move through the complicated space behind his sternum. Tell him thank you, he said. "I will," a beat. "Harry, yeah, you were right about the letter," she said, not responding. "Lucius sent a follow-up yesterday. It was considerably more pointed than the first one. What did you do?" "I didn't respond to that one either," she said, and there was the sharpness again, the dry edge of it. "Seemed consistent." He laughed, actually laughed, standing in the ministry atrium. A witch passing him gave him a startled look. He didn't care. "Good," he said, "I'll see you tonight." "See you tonight," she said, and the mirror went dark. He walked to the flue station at the end of the atrium. Above the main entrance, the rebuilt ministry motto arched across in gold letters: Unity, Progress, and the Rule of Law. Harry had a complicated relationship with all three of those words and what the ministry thought they meant. But he was beginning to think for the first time since the war that the complicated relationship was the right one to have. That it was worth having. He stepped into the flue, said Grimmauld Place, and came home. The letter from Lucius Malfoy arrived by a different owl on Thursday, not the family eagle owl, but a plain post bird, the kind used for anonymous correspondence. The postmark was Wiltshire because evidently subtlety had limits. It was not politely worded. It spoke in the clipped and careful language of a man who had abandoned one layer of performance, about historical rights and proper succession, and the question of whether a war-made hero with no pure lineage truly comprehended the weight of what he held. It raised, obliquely, the possibility that the Gringotts contract might not have been entirely what it appeared. It expressed with elegant menace a hope that the parties involved would consider seeking independent legal counsel to verify the validity of their arrangement before proceeding further down a path that might prove unfortunate. Harry read it, Daphne read it. Hermione, who had arrived for a working dinner, read it and then read it again. "He's escalating faster than I expected," Hermione said. "He's scared," Harry said. Daphne looked at him. "Lucius Malfoy is scared of you." "Of this," Harry said, gesturing slightly, meaning the two of them, the house, the seat activated, all of it. He thought the inquiry would create enough pressure that either the contract wouldn't be signed, or if it was, we'd be defensive and reactive. He set the letter down. "We're not being defensive and reactive." "So he's changing tactics," Daphne said. "He's showing his hand a little," Harry said. "He didn't mean to, but this letter is angrier than the first two. You can see it if you know where to look." He looked at Hermione. "How long before he can file formally?" "If he's been preparing since the inquiry, 4 weeks, maybe 3. Harry was quiet for a moment, then he looked at Daphne. "The solstice gathering, 3 weeks," she said. "We walk in there and we make it impossible to pretend we're anything other than exactly what we are." He held her gaze. 2 houses standing together publicly, surrounded by every person who matters, before he can file anything, before there's any legal gray area. She looked back at him. The composed mask was there, but behind it something was moving. Calculation, yes, but also something more personal than calculation. "That's quite a statement to make at a party," she said. "We're not going to a party," Harry said. "We're going to a political declaration that has canapés." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then the almost smile resolved into an actual one, small, private, real, and she said, "All right, Potter, let's make a statement." Hermione looked between them with the expression of someone watching something happen that she had already predicted and found satisfying. She picked up her quill and went back to her notes and said nothing, because she was smart enough to know when saying nothing was exactly right. Chapter 3, Old Magic, Old Enemies. The thing about ancient magic was that it didn't announce itself. It didn't crackle or glow or smell of ozone the way dueling spells did. It sat in the foundations of things, in ward stones and blood seals and the kind of contractual language that wizards hadn't written in 2 centuries because they'd forgotten why it had been written that way to begin with. It was patient in the way that bedrock was patient. It had been there before you arrived and expected to be there long after. Harry had been learning this slowly, in the way he learned most things, by doing, by touching, by finding the edges of what he didn't know through the physical experience of getting something wrong and then correcting it. The Black Library had helped. Daphne had helped more, in the particular way that someone helps when they don't frame their assistance as help, but simply sit across a table and answer questions with the same focused attention they give to everything. It was a Tuesday morning, Tuesdays apparently having decided to become the operative day of his life, when he found the ritual room. He hadn't been looking for it. He'd been following a draft in the East Wing's lower corridor, because Creature had mentioned a ward cold pocket 3 weeks ago and Harry had been meaning to look at it and kept forgetting. The draft led him to a paneled wall that looked identical to the 6 panels on either side of it. except that when Harry put his hand flat against it, the wood was cold in a specific way, not neglect cold but magic cold, the kind of cold that meant something underneath was very much alive. He pressed it, nothing happened. He tried a low Homora, then a gentle finite, then stood back and looked at the panel with his head tilted. Then he rolled up his sleeve and pressed the back of his wrist to the wood, which was a thing he'd read about in one of the older Black estate texts, some of the deeper house magic keyed to blood rather than spell. The panel opened. The room beyond was not large. Stone floor, lower ceiling than the rest of the house, no windows. In the center was a circular design inlaid into the floor, not carved but grown. It looked like, as if the stone had arranged itself over centuries into the interlocking geometric pattern currently sitting in the low lamplight with the smug self-possession of something that knew it was important. The walls had shelves of materials, not potions but components, sealed jars of things Harry couldn't immediately name. Coils of what looked like pure silver thread, a set of 12 rune-carved stones in a wooden case. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he went to find Daphne. She was in the library where she usually was in the mornings, with 3 books open and her notebook at her left elbow, her quill moving steadily. She looked up when Harry appeared in the doorway, read his face, and said, "What did you find?" "A ritual room," he said. She put the quill down. They spent 3 hours in the room. Daphne moved through it with the careful, methodical attentiveness of someone who had studied advanced magical theory, not touching anything, not yet, but cataloging, reading the labels on jars in the old script she'd clearly spent time learning to read, examining the floor pattern from different angles, occasionally crouching to look at a particular intersection of lines. "Alliance ritual space," she said finally from across the room. "Not sacrificial, not dark, look at the directional marks. They're oriented to the 4 cardinal points, but the primary axis runs east-west. That's relational magic, binding, not breaking." "Is it connected to the contract?" Harry asked. "Almost certainly." She straightened up and looked at the floor design. The Black family used this to formalize their alliances. Legal contracts through Gringotts handled the external recognition, what the ministry and other houses saw. But the real binding, the magical structure that gave an alliance actual weight in terms of ward sharing and house magic, that happened here. Harry looked at the circle. "We need to use it, I think." She stopped and started again more carefully. "I think the contract we signed at Gringotts is legally sufficient on its own. But the reason the Black family maintained this room is that there's a layer of magical consolidation it provides that pure contract law doesn't. The 2 houses' magic, their inherited ward signatures, their ancestral spellwork, they remain separate until this ritual is performed, legally united, magically adjacent. And if we do it," she met his eyes across the stone circle, "the Greengrass family wards and the Black family wards integrate, not merge, they maintain their individual character. But they recognize each other, reinforce each other." She paused. "It would make the magical foundation of our alliance considerably harder to challenge." "How hard is hard?" "The authentication Ragnarok described, the 17 verification markers on the contract, those are external verifications. Someone with enough resources could argue about them theoretically in a legal forum." She looked at the floor again. "This can't be argued about, this is house magic, it speaks for itself." Harry was quiet for a moment. The room had a quality of held breath, like being inside something that was paying attention. "When can we do it?" he said. She looked at him. "You're not going to ask what it involves first? Are you going to tell me it's dangerous?" "Not to us specifically. The ritual requires both parties to be willing. The magic is self-defeating if either participant is coerced. It's one of the oldest forms of consent architecture in wizarding tradition." She tilted her head slightly. "It does require an exchange of house sigils, and a blood component, and a fractional pause contact. The ritual requires the participants to be in physical proximity throughout, specifically with joined hands during the primary invocation." "Daphne," he said, "yes, I'll survive holding your hand." She pressed her lips together. "I know that. I was noting the requirement, not expressing concern about it. You said it with a very specific pause." "I always pause specifically, it's how I talk." This one was different. She looked at him with an expression that was working hard to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. "I'll need a week to research the full invocation properly. I don't want to perform a house alliance ritual from incomplete preparation." "Fine," he said, "a week." He thought she looked slightly relieved, which he found humanizing, and said nothing about. The week was not quiet. On Wednesday, Hermione arrived with a 6-foot scroll of research on Section 7, subsection C of the Ancient Houses Preservation Act, and the news that Lucius Malfoy had met with 2 Wisengamot members in private. A man named Thickness Jr., whose father had been the imperious minister during Voldemort's occupation, and a woman named Selwyn who held the most conservative seat in the chamber and had been making pointed comments about the instability of post-war succession arrangements in the wizarding press. "That's two," Daphne said, looking at the names. "He needs 3 sponsors." "I know." Hermione spread her scroll on the kitchen table. "The third one is harder to identify. He'll go for someone who isn't obviously in his camp, someone who seems neutral. Because if all 3 sponsors are Voldemort adjacent, the challenge looks politically motivated rather than legally grounded." "Who are the convincible neutrals?" Harry asked. "That's what I've been working on." Hermione pointed to a section of the scroll. "There are 4 realistic candidates for a genuinely neutral Wizengamot member who could be persuaded to sponsor a challenge on legalistic rather than political grounds. Griggs, who's retired ministry and cares about procedural correctness. Pemberton, who has a history of supporting succession challenges because she believes the ancient law is worth upholding regardless of who it benefits. Fairfax, who is genuinely non-political but owes Selwyn a favor from a boundary dispute 3 years ago. And Abbot Hannah Abbott's father, who is almost incorruptible but could be approached on the grounds of historical precedent." "Pemberton," Daphne said immediately. "She's the most convincible and the most dangerous because her motivation is the one that sounds principled." "Agreed," Hermione said. "Can we get to her first?" Harry asked. "Marchbanks can," Daphne said. She looked at Harry. "When we meet with Marchbanks this week, I want to raise it directly with her. She and Pemberton have history. If Marchbanks signals support for our position, Pemberton is less likely to lend her credibility to a challenge that Marchbanks is visibly opposing." Harry looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks," she said without apology. The Marchbanks meeting was on Thursday. Griselda Marchbanks was 93, had examined Dumbledore in his NEWTS and often said so, and had a reputation for opinions expressed with surgical completeness. She had an office at the back of the Wizengamot building that smelled of old paper and a specific kind of professional certainty, and she looked at Harry and Daphne when they sat down with the evaluating attention of someone who'd assessed a great many people and generally trusted her own assessment. "So," she said, folding her hands, "House Black and House Greengrass." "Yes," Harry said. "Tell me why I should take your alliance seriously rather than treating it as a young man's inheritance anxiety and a clever girl's political maneuvering." It was a pointed opening. Harry felt Daphne go very still beside him in the way that meant she was calibrating her response, and he made a split-second decision and spoke first. "Because we're not asking you to believe in us," he said. "We're asking you to believe in the legal structure we're operating within, which your chamber built and maintains. The contract is authenticated, the seat is registered, the alliance is real. Whether you find us personally compelling is irrelevant to the legal question." Marchbanks looked at him with something that recalibrated slightly. "And the legal question is whether Lucius Malfoy gets to use your procedural mechanisms to undo a legally executed alliance because it blocks his route back to relevance," Harry said. "That's the actual question, dressed up in ancient house law language, but that's what it is." A pause. "You're blunter than I expected," Marchbanks said. "I've found that being indirect with people who prefer directness is a waste of everyone's time," Harry said. Marchbanks looked at Daphne. "And you?" "I'd add one thing," Daphne said. "A successful challenge to this contract doesn't just affect us. It establishes precedent that authenticated goblin contracts can be challenged in the Wizengamot on grounds of historical disputation. That precedent has implications for every family in this chamber that holds it standing through goblin-verified instruments." She let that sit. "Which is most of them." Marchbanks was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Pemberton." "Yes," Daphne said. "You think she'll be approached?" "I think she's the most principled candidate available, which makes her the most attractive option for someone who needs their challenge to appear legally motivated rather than politically motivated." Marchbanks looked at her with what was unmistakably respect. "You've mapped this carefully. My father taught me that you prepare for the move after the move you're currently making," Daphne said. "And the one after that." Another pause, longer this time. Marchbanks looked between them with the air of someone making a final assessment. Then she sat back in her chair and said, "I won't formally endorse your alliance, that's not the role of a sitting Wizengamot member, but I will make clear to Pemberton privately that I consider a challenge to properly authenticated ancient contracts to be a dangerous precedent regardless of which house is involved." A fractional pause. "And I will say the same to Ogden before your meeting with him." That's more than enough, Harry said. Thank you. Don't thank me, Marchbanks said. Come back in 3 months when this is settled and we'll discuss what the Black Seat's actual voting history should look like. They shook hands and left. In the corridor outside, Daphne exhaled once quietly. Harry glanced at her. All right, she's formidable, Daphne said. Yeah, I liked her, she said, which coming from Daphne he understood was not casual. She doesn't perform any of it. No, he agreed, she just is it. Daphne nodded slightly, and he thought she was filing that away as a standard to aspire to. Thursday evening, after the Marchbanks meeting, after a dinner that had started as a working discussion and ended with them 3 hours deep into the history of Alliance magic and the cold remains of Creature's excellent roast chicken, Daphne said, I want to tell you something. Harry set down his notes. She had a quality when she decided to say something personal of gathering herself first, not hesitation exactly, more like accuracy. Like she wanted to hit the target cleanly. My mother didn't want me to sign the contract, she said. He waited. She was afraid, Daphne continued. Not of you specifically, of the exposure. A Greengrass daughter in the same public position as Harry Potter, the scrutiny, the risk, the way any mistake becomes a headline. She looked at her hands, then back at him. She spent 20 years being afraid in a very controlled way, managing the fear by managing everything around it. She thought the safest thing was to let the solicitors find an alternative and keep the family quiet. But your father disagreed, Harry said. My father said that quiet had kept us alive and had also kept us small. She paused. He said there was a difference between survival and actually living in your own name. A beat. My mother didn't speak to him for a week after he told me about the contract. Is she? Harry searched for the right question. How is she now? Cautious, Daphne said. She'll come to the solstice gathering, she'll wear the right dress and she'll stand with us because she is my mother and she won't abandon me publicly regardless of her private position. A pause that was more careful than usual. But she's scared, and I want you to know that because when you meet her she'll seem cold and I don't want you to take it as hostility. Harry looked at her. The fire was low and the kitchen was warm in that uneven way that old houses managed. And she was sitting across from him being honest about something that clearly cost something to say. My Aunt Petunia was afraid of magic her entire life, he said. Spent 20 years making that fear look like contempt. He paused. I won't take it personally. She nodded, then quietly, thank you. You don't have to thank me for, I know I don't have to, she said. I'm choosing to. The fire shifted. Somewhere upstairs, Creature was doing something that involved a broom on a hardwood floor. The ordinary sounds of a house in the evening. The ritual room, Harry said after a moment. Have you started on the invocation research? 4 hours today, she said, the transition back to practical territory smooth and without discomfort. I found a text in the archive section of the library, the one I had to use a specific unlocking charm to access, that has a direct reference to the Black Family Alliance ritual. The invocation has 3 stages. The preparation, which involves the ward sigil exchange and takes about an hour. The primary invocation itself, which is spoken, both participants alternating in Old English with specific pronunciation requirements I need to practice. And the sealing, which is the blood component. How much blood? A few drops each. It's symbolic rather than substantive. She tilted her head. The magical theory is actually elegant. The blood acts as a carrier for your core magical signature. It's more specific than a wand impression, more personal than a spoken oath. When the 2 signatures contact each other within the prepared circle, the house magics have enough information to integrate properly. And you're confident we can do it without a specialist? She looked at him steadily. I am the specialist. He held up a hand. Fair. I'll be ready Sunday, she said. If you are, I'm ready now. Sunday, she repeated with the particular firmness that meant she had a standard she wanted to meet and was going to meet it. Sunday, he agreed. Friday brought eldest Greengrass to dinner and an unexpected additional guest. Astoria. Harry had not met Astoria yet. He'd heard her described by Daphne in the measured, fond, slightly exasperated tones of an older sister, and he'd formed a picture which turned out to be approximately 40% accurate. She was 17, half a head shorter than Daphne, with lighter hair and her father's warm eyes, and she came through the flu and immediately said, "Oh, it's actually quite lovely in here, Daphne. You said it was gloomy." "It was gloomy," Daphne said. "I ungloomed it." "You ungloomed an entire house in 6 weeks. Creature helped. Astoria turned to Harry with the directness of someone who had grown up watching her sister be extremely contained and had decided that someone in the family ought to take a different approach. "Harry Potter," she said, "are you what my sister says you are?" "What does she say I am?" Harry said. "Sensible," Astoria said. "She called you sensible. For Daphne that's basically a declaration of deep respect." Astoria, Daphne said. "What? It's true." She looked around the kitchen with open curiosity. You have an elf, Creature. Yes, Harry said. He's. Creature appeared at that moment, took one look at Astoria and said to Harry, "The young second miss has a pleasant manner," which from Creature was approximately a papal blessing. Astoria beamed at him. "Hello, I'm Astoria, I'll probably be here a lot." Creature actually made a sound that was dangerously close to a chuckle and disappeared. "She does that to everyone," Daphne told Harry with an air of someone who has long since made peace with a fact of nature. "People just open up." "I noticed," Harry said. Eldest Greengrass arrived a few minutes later through the flue with the measured dignity of a man who had dressed for a dinner that was also a political meeting and had found the right register for both. He shook Harry's hand with the same warm formality as at Gringotts, looked around Grimmauld Place with the assessing eye of someone familiar with old houses and said, "The wards are improved since last month." "You can feel the ward difference?" Harry asked, slightly surprised. "Old family talent," Aldous said simply. "Greengrass men have always been ward-sensitive. Daphne gets it from her mother's side, but in a different form." He looked at his older daughter. "You've integrated the inner ward configuration." "Yes," Daphne said. "Good." He said it with the specific satisfaction of a man who approves of thoroughness, and rarely says so in more words than necessary. Dinner was good, not politically orchestrated or carefully managed, just good. Astoria asked Harry questions with an honest curiosity that was so different from the usual either reverence or wariness he got, that he found himself answering with more openness than he'd planned. She wanted to know what it was actually like to fly, not the battle, not the war, just the flying. She wanted to know whether Dumbledore had been as magnificent as everyone said or whether that was retrospective polish. She asked Hermione via casual, "Is Hermione Granger actually here sometimes?" directed at Harry, whether her arithmancy paper on the theoretical limits of Fidelius charms was available to read. "I'll get you a copy," Daphne said, in the resigned tone of an older sister who has had to do this many times. "I'd be honored actually," Hermione said, genuinely, because someone wanting to read her paper on arithmancy was Hermione's love language. After dinner, while Astoria was interrogating Creature about the history of the house with an enthusiasm that Creature was clearly finding both exhausting and delightful, Aldous sat with Harry and Daphne over tea and spoke plainly. "Calloway and Brightmoor filed a motion Monday," he said. "I have a contact at the Wisengamot clerk's office. It's not the formal challenge yet, it's a preliminary motion requesting a review of the Black estate succession documentation. Procedurally, it's a precursor. They're building a paper trail, buying time while Lucius finds his third sponsor," Daphne said. "Yes," Aldous looked at Harry. "I wanted to ask you something directly. You registered the Black seat Thursday. Have you considered attending a session before the solstice gathering?" Harry had. "I was thinking the session 2 weeks from now." "I would bring it forward," Aldous said. "The session next Tuesday, the emergency review of the Creature Rights Amendment is on the agenda. It's a significant vote and a Black seat presence would be noted." He paused. "It would make the preliminary motion from Calloway and Brightmoor look like what it is, an attempt to challenge someone already actively exercising legitimate power rather than someone whose standing is theoretical." Harry looked at him. The man was thinking 3 moves ahead and presenting it as a suggestion rather than an instruction, which Harry respected. "You've been doing this a long time," he said. "Longer than I'd like," Aldous said without self-pity. "I learned it watching men more powerful than me make mistakes I couldn't afford to make. The lesson of every mistake was the same: don't wait for events to move. Move first and let events respond to you." Daphne was looking at her father with a complicated expression. Love, yes, but also something older than love. The recognition of where you come from. "I'll be there Tuesday," Harry said. Sunday came. They prepared the ritual room in the morning, Daphne directing the preparation with quiet precision, Harry following her instructions without argument because she had done the research and he hadn't, and this wasn't a moment to let pride make a contribution. The floor pattern, once activated with a specific sequence of tapped rune points, began to emit a low warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The jars on the shelves stayed closed. "The silver thread went unused. That was for a different, more advanced working," Daphne said, and this wasn't the day for it. She had spent Saturday practicing the Old English invocation until she was satisfied with every syllable. Harry had spent Saturday reading the translation she'd written out for him, understanding what he was agreeing to in a language his ancestors hadn't used in 800 years, and finding that he agreed to it without reservation. They stood at opposite edges of the stone circle facing each other. The lamplight was steady. The house was quiet. Creature had taken himself to the kitchen with the instinctive discretion of a house elf who understood the weight of old ritual. "Ward sigils first," Daphne said. She reached into her pocket and produced a small disc of dark stone, House Greengrass's sigil seal, carved with the vines and diamonds pattern of their family mark. Harry produced the Black family sigil, which he'd found in the estate's first-tier archive box, a silver disc, the family star pattern old enough that the edges had worn smooth. They crossed the circle and exchanged them without speaking, which was part of the invocation's first stage. Harry held the Greengrass seal in his left hand and felt something, not dramatic, not electric, just a quiet acknowledgement, the feeling of a lock recognizing a key. From the look on Daphne's face when she took the black seal, she felt it too. They returned to their respective positions. "Ready?" she said. "Yes," he said. She began the first line of the invocation in Old English, her pronunciation careful and exact, the words carrying the specific weight of language built to carry magic before modern spellwork existed. Harry answered with the response line. Back and forth, call and response, the language building a structure between them as tangible as the stone under their feet. He was not a linguist. But he knew what the words meant as he said them, and the meaning was straightforward in the way that only very old promises manage to be. "I stand for you. Your house is my house's concern. Your enemies are met with our combined face. This is not servitude, this is choice." The circle's carved lines began to glow, not dramatically, not the explosive visual display of a duel, just a steady warmth rising out of the stone in the color of deep amber. At the midpoint of the invocation, they walked forward to the center of the circle. This was the joined hands part. Harry offered his right hand. Daphne looked at it for a moment, not hesitantly, just seeing it clearly, and took it. Her hand was cool, like all of her, and then less cool. Their hands found an easy grip without fumbling. They finished the invocation together, the last 3 lines spoken simultaneously, and Harry felt it when the house magics met, not painful, not strange, but resonant, like a chord resolving. Like something that had been almost something for weeks becoming actually something. The blood component was quick. A small silver lancet from the ritual supplies, a few drops from each of them onto the central stone of the floor pattern. The amber glow deepened, held, and then settled, not extinguishing but integrating into the stone, becoming part of the floor itself. Done. They stood in the middle of the circle, still holding hands in the quiet that followed. "Did it work?" Harry asked. She looked at the walls, the shelves, the floor. She closed her eyes briefly and then opened them. "Yes," she said, "the ward signatures are already adjusting. You'll feel the Greengrass ward character in the outer perimeter within an hour, probably. It'll feel like warmth in a direction you weren't expecting." "What will you feel?" she considered. "Something steadier," she said. "The black wards have a depth that the Greengrass ones don't, they're older. It'll feel like standing on firmer ground." He realized he was still holding her hand. She hadn't moved. Neither had he. "Daphne," he said. "Yes. I think we just made this real," he said, "not the contract, not the legal filing. This, the thing they were standing in the middle of." She looked at him directly, honestly, without the mask or the armor or the careful precision, just her. "I think we did," she said. She stepped back. He let her hand go. The practical world reasserted itself, the stone floor, the lamplight, the smell of old magic settling. "I'm going to have tea," she said with a composure that was slightly more effortful than usual. "And I'm going to pretend I need to check some reference notes." "That's fine," he said. "I'll probably not actually check them." "I know." She walked out of the ritual room. Harry stood in the circle for another minute, feeling the ward warmth shifting in the walls, feeling the house adjust itself to what it now held. Then from downstairs he heard Creature's voice carrying up. "The owl from Wiltshire has arrived." Harry walked out of the ritual room and down the stairs, and Creature met him in the corridor with an envelope in one gnarled hand and an expression of deep goblin-echoing solemnity on his aged face. The envelope had no name on the outside. The seal was broken. Creature had opened it, which he would not have done unless he judged it necessary. Inside was a single line in Lucius Malfoy's handwriting. "You cannot hold what you don't understand, boy. And you understand less than you think." Harry read it. He read it again. Then he put it in his pocket, went to the kitchen where Daphne was sitting with her tea and her not actually being checked reference notes, and set it on the table in front of her. She read it. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes went from the paper to him with a specific quality. "He's found out something," she said. "He thinks he has," Harry said. "There's a difference." "What do you think he's found?" Harry sat down. Thought about it properly, the ward access attempt, the preliminary motion, the carefully escalating correspondence, the timeline. He's been looking for something specific in the Black family archive. Something he thinks undermines the contract or our standing. The trespass wasn't just a fishing expedition, he was looking for a particular thing. Which means he knows something about the Black estate documents that we don't yet, Daphne said slowly. "What could there be?" Harry said, more to himself than to her. "Something about the contract itself," she said. or about the heir designation. Ragnarok said Sirius's formal adoption of you as heir was never registered with the ministry, only with the goblins. Goblin contract law supersedes ministry registration, yes, but if Lucius found a way to challenge the goblin registration itself, Harry said, not the authentication, the process. If there's any procedural irregularity in how Sirius executed the heir designation, she stopped. We need to see the original heir designation document. I'll call Ragnarok tomorrow. Tonight, she said. He looked at her. He said to come promptly if anything significant arose, she said, with the composure of someone who had made the decision and was explaining the logic rather than defending the choice. This is significant. He picked up his communication mirror. Ragnarok, contacted at 7:30 in the evening, was not visibly annoyed. He was, however, very still. He listened to the account of the letter and Harry's deduction without expression. When Harry finished, Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Mr. Potter, he said, the heir designation document is in the primary Black Estate archive. I will personally review it tonight. If there is any irregularity, you will have my assessment by morning. There might not be one, Harry said. No, Ragnarok agreed. But Lucius Malfoy does not write letters like that based on nothing. He looked at Harry through the mirror. I should tell you, the preliminary motion filed Monday by Calloway and Brightmore specifically requests access to the heir designation instrument. We have declined the request on standard grounds. They will appeal. How long do we have before the appeal is heard? 2 weeks. 2 weeks before Lucius potentially got to look at the document he was trying to reach. 2 weeks, and the solstice gathering was in 3. Ragnarok, Harry said, whatever he's found or thinks he's found, I want to know first, before any proceeding, before any hearing. You will, Ragnarok said, and ended the call. Harry set the mirror down. Daphne was looking at him with the focused, unafraid attention she brought to problems, and he was looking back at her with the same, and between them was the warmth of two house magics that had just learned to recognize each other, and the single line of a man who thought that understanding was something Harry lacked. He's going to be wrong, Harry said. Obviously, Daphne said, but let's make sure we know how before he finds out. She picked up her quill and opened a fresh page in her notebook, and Harry reached for the letter again, and they worked until midnight, the house warm around them, the wards deep and integrated and entirely unmistakably real. Chapter 4. The Winter Ball. The Great Hall of the Wisengamot building had been designed in 1612 by an architect who believed that power should be visible, and had spent considerable effort ensuring that anyone who walked through the main entrance understood immediately that they were in a space that took itself very seriously. The ceiling was vaulted stone, charmed to reflect the winter sky outside, currently a deep, clear black with hard stars and the suggestion of frost. The chandeliers were not enchanted for warmth, they burned with the cold white light of something that wanted to be impressive rather than comfortable. The floor was black marble. The walls were draped in the colors of ancient houses, which at any given solstice gathering looked like someone had laid out every flag from a particularly serious war and told them to mingle. Harry had been here twice before. Both times he'd arrived with ministry escorts who had spent the evening navigating him around the room like a chess piece, positioning him near useful people and extracting him from inconvenient ones. He had found it exhausting in a particular way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness, the tiredness of being used as a prop in a room full of people who were also being used as props and all pretending otherwise. This time he arrived with Daphne. The difference was immediate and structural and not subtle. They came through the main entrance at 9, which was late enough to be noticed and early enough to have the room's full attention without seeming to have timed it, which they absolutely had. Harry was in formal black robes with the black family crest worked into the collar in silver. Creature had found them in the estate wardrobe, had spent 3 days restoring them, and had presented them with the air of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this. Daphne was in deep green silk, the Greengrass family emerald at her throat, her hair up in a way that managed to be both severe and quietly devastating. She walked with the posture of someone who had been trained from childhood to inhabit a room, and she entered the solstice gathering the way a sentence enters a paragraph, purposefully with clear intent, and making everything around it adjust to accommodate it. They paused at the top of the 3 entrance steps, which gave the room approximately 8 seconds to notice them before they descended. 8 seconds was enough. Harry felt the shift in the room's attention the way you felt weather changing, a movement, a settling, a collective redirect of focus that moved through the crowd in a visible wave. Ready? He said quietly. I've been ready for 3 weeks. she said at the same volume, and they walked down. The first 20 minutes were navigational. Not aggressive, neither of them was interested in opening with aggression but deliberate. They moved through the room as a unit, which sounds simple and is not, because moving as a unit with someone requires a constant peripheral awareness of where they are and what they're attending to, and whether they need you to shift half a step to cover an angle. Harry and Daphne had, over the preceding weeks, developed this without discussing it, the way you developed a working rhythm with someone through enough shared hours. He took the conversations that required his particular weight. She took the ones that required her particular fluency. When both were needed, they stood together and let the conversation find its own level. Ogden found them first, round, red-faced, with the specific bonhomie of a man who liked people and found politics an unfortunate necessary condition of influencing them. He pumped Harry's hand with both of his, told Daphne she looked magnificent, and then said, very quietly and very quickly, "Lucius is in the east alcove. He arrived at 7:30 and has had 3 separate conversations I couldn't hear but watched. He's building something tonight." "Thank you, Erasmus," Daphne said. Ogden gave her an appraising look. "Your father taught you well." "He tried," she said. "I improved on the curriculum." Ogden laughed, a real laugh, not a social one, and moved on. "The east alcove," Harry said. "I know," she said. "Don't look." "I'm not looking. You were about to." He wasn't." He redirected his gaze to the drinks table and picked up 2 glasses of the excellent elf-made wine that Gringotts catered the solstice gathering with annually. Handed one to Daphne. "Tell me who the woman in the blue robes is." Daphne didn't look directly at the woman. She took her wine, surveyed the room with the comprehensive, apparently casual gaze that Harry was beginning to understand contained significantly more information than it appeared to. "Lydia Pemberton," she said, "and she's currently looking at us." "Is that good or bad?" "Undecided." She sipped her wine. "She's trying to determine whether we're what the room thinks we are or whether we're what Lucius has told her we are." "What has Lucius told her we are?" "Something opportunistic and legally fragile, probably." She turned slightly toward Harry in a way that looked conversational but was angled away from Pemberton's sightline. "She's a principal's woman. She'll make her decision based on what she observes tonight, not on what she's been told, which means tonight matters." Harry thought about that. "Then we need her to see us being what we actually are rather than performing what we want her to think we are." "Yes," Daphne said, "which is why you need to stop strategizing and just exist." He looked at her. "Just exist. You're better at it than you think," she said. "When you're not in your own head, you're actually quite good in a room. I've watched you. People trust you instinctively, you just usually seem to be waiting for the next thing rather than being in the current one." He was quiet for a moment. "That's very specific." "I'm a specific person, I've noticed." He looked at her. The chandelier light caught the emerald at her throat. "Shall we go and be in the current one?" She met his eyes with that expression that was almost a smile and never quite arrived until it arrived properly, and said, "Lead the way." Rosalind Vance found them near the east windows and turned out to be exactly what Harry had expected from a woman who had taken her sister's Wisengamot seat, direct, measured, and completely uninterested in small talk. "I'll cut to it," she said, which Harry appreciated enormously. "I've been watching the Malfoy preliminary motion with concern. Not because I oppose challenges in principle, the mechanism exists for good reasons, but because the specific procedural path he's pursuing has implications I find worrying." She looked at Harry. "The appeal for access to your heir designation document. If granted, it creates a template for any sufficiently resourced party to request access to private Gringotts instruments on grounds of historical dispute. That's a precedent I don't want to exist." "Marchbanks said something similar," Harry said. "Griselda and I have been friends for 40 years, Vance said. "We are not always in agreement about methods, but we agree about this." She looked between Harry and Daphne. "What I want to know is whether your alliance is stable enough to weather a formal challenge if Malfoy gets his 3rd sponsor." "Yes," Harry said. "Why?" "Because the contract is genuine, the ritual is done." He said it without preamble. "The legal foundation is sound and the magical foundation is stronger than the legal one. He could file a challenge tomorrow and it would fail." Vance looked at Daphne. "You agree. The ritual integration is 2 days old," Daphne said. "Any independent magical assessment would confirm it. You can't challenge something that's already structurally real." Vance was quiet for a moment, then she said, "All right, I'll bring it to Pemberton directly. She and I have history that Malfoy doesn't know about, and she will not want to be on the opposite side of a position that Marchbanks, Ogden, and I hold in common." She moved off into the crowd. Harry and Daphne looked at each other. "That was efficient," he said. "She's a Vance," Daphne said, as if that explained everything, which it probably did. The encounter with Lucius happened at 10:15, which was long enough into the evening that Harry had stopped waiting for it. He was standing near the main drinks table talking to Neville, who had arrived late with Hannah Abbott on his arm and a slightly shell-shocked expression at the formal grandeur, and had immediately attached himself to Harry with the relief of someone finding a familiar landmark, when he became aware of a presence at his peripheral left that had the specific quality of studied casualness. He turned before Lucius spoke. Lucius Malfoy at 60 looked like what he'd always been dressed as, old money with excellent bone structure and the deliberate posture of a man who had decided to make self-possession into a weapon. He'd lost the cane since the war, and the white blonde hair was shorter, and something around his eyes was different in a way Harry couldn't precisely name. Harder maybe, or more careful. The distinction between those two things mattered. "Mr. Potter," Lucius said, his voice carried the same velvet composure it always had. "You look well." "Lucius," Harry said. He did not use the honorific because he was holding two of his own now and had earned both of them. "I don't think I've seen you since the Shacklebolt administration reception in June. Number I've been somewhat occupied." A pause. "As I understand you have been. Getting married tends to take up time, yes." Neville, to his credit, said nothing. He just stood slightly straighter. Lucius's eyes moved to Daphne, who had appeared at Harry's right with the silent precision of someone who had been watching this approach from across the room and had timed her arrival to the second. "Miss Greengrass," Lucius said, "your father is well, I hope." "He is," Daphne said. "Thank you for asking. The Greengrass family has always been," Lucius paused, appearing to select the word thoughtfully, "resilient." "It's a family trait," she said with the exact warmth of a winter morning. Something moved in Lucius's expression. Not anger, he was too controlled for anger in a room like this, but a recalibration. He was looking at Harry with the specific attention of someone who had formed an expectation and was now revising it. Harry recognized the look. He'd been getting various versions of it for 20 years from people who expected him to be something manageable and found him otherwise. "I heard about the ward incident at Grimmauld Place," Lucius said. "Unfortunate. I hope the matter was resolved satisfactorily." "Very satisfactorily," Harry said. "The documentation of the trespass was particularly thorough. Gringotts were appreciative of the detail." A beat. Lucius's jaw did something controlled. "I'm glad to hear it. Were you involved?" Harry said, conversationally, with genuine curiosity. The room near them had gone quiet in the particular way that a crowd goes quiet when it senses something interesting. Lucius looked at Harry for a moment that was 3 seconds long and felt like longer. "Of course not," he said. "Good," Harry said. "I'd hate for there to be any confusion about that, given the preliminary motion your firm filed last week." "Calloway and Brightmore are not my firm," Lucius said. "I am simply an interested party in the proper stewardship of." "Lucius," Harry said, and his voice was the same easy register it had been throughout, "I don't particularly mind that you're trying. I mind that you think I won't notice." He smiled. It was a genuine smile, which made it worse. "The seat is registered. The alliance is real. I attended the creature rights session on Tuesday and voted on the amendment, which passed, by the way. And we're standing here tonight in front of everyone who matters, and I think you can see how this is going." He tilted his head slightly. "The Malfoy family has a lot of history in this world, some of it worth keeping. Find something worth spending your energy on." Lucius looked at him. Whatever was behind those pale eyes was genuinely unreadable, which meant it was significant. "Enjoy the evening," Harry said, and turned back to Neville, who was wearing the expression of someone who had just watched a Quidditch play from 3 feet away and was still processing it. Lucius departed. "Blimey," Neville said very quietly. "Sorry about that," Harry said. "You were saying something about herbology funding." Neville shook his head. "Right, yes, the funding," from his right, almost inaudibly. "That was well done." He glanced at Daphne. She was looking at the middle distance with a composed expression, but there was something in the line of her shoulders that was satisfaction. "You saw the whole thing," he said. "I positioned myself to see the whole thing," she said, 2 minutes before he approached. "And Pemberton was watching," she said. "She saw the whole thing too." The evening turned somewhere around 11. The formal part, the chamber president's address, the ceremonial recognition of the year's significant events, the traditional lighting of the solstice lamps, was done. And what remained was the social architecture of a large gathering of people who had spent 3 hours being professionally careful and were now beginning to be actual human beings. Harry and Daphne found a slightly quieter corner near the east windows with Ron and Hermione, who had arrived at 10, and whom Harry had barely managed to reach before Ron had been intercepted by 3 separate Auror colleagues who all wanted to discuss the creature rights vote and had opinions. Hermione had spent the first hour in quiet, intense conversation with Marchbanks, which both of them seemed to find immensely satisfying. Ron had also, somewhere in the evening, met Astoria, who had come with her parents and immediately found the most interesting person under 25 in the room, which appeared to be Ron. They were deep in a conversation about Quidditch tactics that had wandered into magical theory, in a way that neither of them seemed to have anticipated. "She's brilliant," Ron told Harry, when Astoria was briefly distracted by Hermione saying something that caught her attention. "I mean, she was asking about the Chudley Cannon's formation strategy, and then somehow we were talking about momentum charms, and she had 3 completely original observations about conservation of magical energy in flight patterns." "She's Daphne's sister," Harry said. "Yeah, I'd worked that out," Ron said. "Daphne doesn't seem surprised by anything." "Astoria seems surprised by everything, but in a good way." He paused. "She's 17, Harry, I know. I'm just noting that as a fact about reality." "I know, Ron." Ron drank his wine. "Your evening went well from what I saw." "Mostly," Harry said. "I watched you talk to Malfoy." "Yeah." Hermione couldn't hear the actual words, but she said your body language was aggressive. "It was extremely polite." Hermione said politely aggressive. Ron grinned. "She was impressed, which she won't say directly, but you can tell." Harry looked across the room to where Daphne was now standing with her mother, a tall, composed woman in dark blue robes who had the same precise posture as her older daughter and the careful eyes of someone managing fear with considerable expertise. Daphne was talking to her in a low, easy way, and whatever she was saying was making her mother's shoulders come down fractionally from where they'd been held. "She's good," Ron said, following Harry's gaze. "Yeah," Harry said, "not just smart, good." Ron paused. "Like with people, she doesn't have to be, but she is." Another pause, the Ron-shaped pause that preceded him saying something he'd been thinking for a while. "You seem different this past month." Harry looked at him. "Different how?" "Present," Ron said, "like you've been here but you've been somewhere else simultaneously for a while since the war probably." He wasn't being heavy about it, just accurate. "The last few weeks you seem more like you're actually in the room you're in." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Daphne told me something similar." "Well," Ron said, "she's right and she notices things." He finished his wine. "I'm glad, mate, that's all." It was the most Ron had said about how Harry had been, and it was exactly the right amount. Harry nodded, and they stood together in comfortable quiet the way they'd been doing since they were 11, watching the room move. Daphne came to find him at 11:30, having navigated her mother through an introduction to Vance that had gone better than expected, having briefly spoken to Marchbanks, having spent 10 minutes with her father in a corner that Harry could see involved a significant amount of precise discussion. She arrived at his side with the look of someone who has completed a demanding list and is allowing themselves 1 minute of not having a list. "Your mother?" he asked. "She met Rosalind Vance," Daphne said. "Vance has the specific quality of making people feel that being cautious is actually strategically sophisticated rather than personally limiting." A pause. "It helped. Good. She still hasn't spoken to you." "I know, that's fine." Daphne looked at him. "You're not taking it personally." "I told you I wouldn't," he said. "I meant it." She was quiet for a moment. They were standing near the east windows and outside the frost had come fully in, the city lights of wizarding London visible through the charmed glass in their muted, warm clusters. The solstice lamps had been lit an hour ago and their amber light was doing something genuinely beautiful to the vaulted ceiling, making the cold stone look like it had warmth in it. It was, Harry thought, the first time he'd actually noticed something was beautiful at one of these events rather than cataloging it as a backdrop. "Pemberton spoke to me," Daphne said. He turned to her. "When?" 20 minutes ago, while you were with Ron." She kept her voice even, but something in it had the quality of news. She introduced herself, said she'd been watching the evening with interest, said she'd had a conversation with Vance that she found clarifying. "Did she say which way she was going to go?" "Not explicitly." Daphne paused. She said that in 30 years of watching ancient house politics she had learned to tell the difference between an alliance built for use and an alliance that was real, and that she found the distinction more legible than she expected tonight. Harry absorbed that. "She's not going to be Malfoy's third sponsor." "I don't think so." A pause. "She said something else." He waited. "She said," Daphne stopped and started again with slightly more care than usual. "She said that the last ancient house ritual integration she'd observed the effects of was 40 years ago and that the ward signature adjustment was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. She'd been able to feel it on us from across the room." A fractional pause. "She said it was convincing evidence of the sort that no legal proceeding could argue with." Harry looked at her. "She could feel the ritual integration." "Apparently," Daphne said, "she's an old magic specialist. She'd know." He was quiet for a moment, turning over the implications. "So the room knows," he said, "not as a legal fact, as a felt thing." "Yes." She looked at him with that steady, clear gaze. Which is actually better. She was right, a legal fact could be argued. A felt thing, a thing that the room's most respected old magic specialist had directly experienced, was something that entered people's understanding at a different level. It wasn't information, it was reality. The third sponsor problem is solved, Harry said. Not formally, she said, but practically yes. She paused. Lucius knows too. He'll have felt it when he stood close enough to us earlier. Something moved in her expression, not satisfaction exactly, something more complex than satisfaction. That's why he didn't escalate, why he let the conversation end the way it did. Harry thought about those pale eyes doing their unreadable thing and understood it now. Lucius had felt it, the combined ward signature that had no business being as consolidated as it was after only 2 days, and he had revised something in his calculation. The letter, you understand less than you think, had been written when he still believed the ritual hadn't been performed, when he thought the alliance was legally real but magically thin. He'd walked into the solstice gathering expecting to find a gap he could use. There was no gap. He'll find another angle, Harry said. Of course he will, Daphne said. But he's lost tonight and he knows it, and now he'll have to find an angle from a less advantageous position. Good, Harry said. They stood with that for a moment. The gathering was moving toward its close, the crowd thinning, voices lower, the particular atmosphere of an evening that had done what it set out to do beginning to relax. The solstice lamps burned steadily. Can I ask you something? Harry said. Yes, she said without qualification. Before all this, before the contract, before Gringotts, what did you think was going to happen with your life? She turned to look at him fully, which she did when she was going to answer something properly. I thought I would negotiate a suitable marriage eventually. Someone from an acceptable family, not Voldemort adjacent, intelligent enough to hold a conversation. She said it without self-pity, just factually, which made it sadder somehow. I thought it would be functional, manageable. I thought I would have my work and my books and Astoria's visits and it would be enough. A pause. I didn't think there was another option. I wasn't raised to expect one. And now, he said. She held his gaze. Now I'm not sure what this is yet, she said, but it's not manageable and it's not enough of a lesser thing. She paused carefully. It's actually something. Which is different from what I expected. He didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at her, this composed, precise, quietly courageous person who had signed a contract she didn't have to sign because it seemed worth finding out, and had opened a room that growled, and had fixed his wards without being asked, and had navigated this entire evening with a combination of intelligence and genuine feeling that he was increasingly certain most people in this room were completely incapable of. I'm glad it's something, he said. Not more than that, because she wasn't ready for more than that, and he was honest enough with himself to know he was still locating where exactly he was in relation to her. But it was true, and it was enough for now, and she received it with a stillness that was not composure but something more interior. We should find our families, she said, before the evening ends. Probably, he agreed. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then she turned, and he fell into step beside her, and they moved back through the thinning crowd, past Hermione and Astoria, who had ended up in an animated three-way conversation with Neville about magical theory, past Ron, who was laughing at something Hannah had said, past the Wisengamot members who watched them cross the room, and formed their various conclusions, past eldest Greengrass, who caught his daughter's eye, and gave her the fractional nod of a man who has seen what he needed to see, and found it sufficient. At the exit, Cressida Greengrass, Daphne's mother, precise in her dark blue robes, careful-eyed and still, was waiting. She looked at Harry as he approached beside her daughter, and he looked back at her without demand, without expectation. Just present, as Daphne had told him to be. Cressida Greengrass held out her hand. Mr. Potter, she said. Her voice was measured and controlled like everything about her, but beneath the control there was something genuine. He shook it. Mrs. Greengrass, it's good to meet you. A pause. She looked at him, really looked, the way people looked when they had been afraid of something for a long time and were deciding whether to still be afraid. Daphne, she said without releasing Harry's hand, is the most important thing I have. She said it the way she might state a fact of natural law. I know, Harry said. She's told me enough about how you raised her that I understand why. It was not a performance. It was simply true because Daphne had told him enough in those late evenings in the kitchen about the way she'd been raised, the standards, the precision, the love expressed sideways through education and preparation, and her mother's insistence that she know exactly how to handle herself in any room that Harry did understand. Cressida Greengrass released his hand. Something in her face changed, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the movement toward it. The first step of an ice sheet beginning very slowly to thaw. I expect we'll be seeing quite a lot of you, she said. I expect so, Harry agreed. They said their good nights. The Greengrasses flew from the building's designated departure point. Ron and Hermione found Harry and they left together into the cold December street, the city around them glittering with ordinary lights, the solstice lamps of the event still visible through the tall windows above. Ron said, "Malfoy looked like he'd bitten into something sour when he left." "Good," Harry said. "Also, Astoria told me 3 separate things that I'm now going to have to look up because I don't know if she was right, but I suspect she was." "She usually is," Harry said. "Unsettling quality in a 17-year-old, Ron said. "Very Greengrass," Harry said. Hermione, who had been quiet and processing the evening in the way she processed large amounts of information, said, "Pemberton isn't going to sponsor the challenge." "No," Harry confirmed. "Which means Lucius needs to find someone else, which means the filing timeline extends, which means we have time," Daphne said from Harry's other side. She had rejoined them from her family's departure without Harry precisely registering when. "But we should use it." "Ragnock called this evening," Harry said. "He checked the mirror during the formal address and found a message. He's completed his review of the heir designation document." "And," Hermione said, "he wants to meet tomorrow." Harry paused. "He said the document is clean but that he found something else, something he called." He checked his memory for the exact phrase. "Historically significant." They all absorbed that. "Historically significant," Daphne repeated. "His words." "Goblins don't use words like that unless they mean exactly what the words imply," she said. "I know," Harry said. The city moved around them. The frost had come fully in and their breath showed in the cold air, and the evening was done and the next thing was already forming its shape in the middle distance. "Well," Ron said with the specific practicality that Harry had always loved about him. "Tomorrow then." "Tomorrow," Harry agreed. He looked at Daphne, who was looking at him with the calculating, steady, quietly lit expression she got when she was genuinely interested in what was coming next. He felt the same thing, historically significant. Whatever Lucius thought he knew, Harry thought, the thing in the Gringotts vault might be something else entirely, something older. Something that changed the shape of the board in a direction nobody was currently expecting. He realized, not afraid to find out. That was new. And it was, like most of the new things this autumn had brought, considerably better than what had come before. Chapter 5. The contract's teeth. Ragnock's office at the deep level of Gringotts felt different in winter. The green gold lamps burned with the same steady indifference, but the stone held a cold that even the fire in the corner couldn't fully answer, and the old goblin behind the enormous desk had the particular stillness of someone who had been sitting with a significant thing overnight and had decided exactly how to present it. Harry and Daphne arrived at 9. Hermione was already there, which meant she'd been there since 8, which meant Ragnock had contacted her separately, which meant whatever this was had legal dimensions significant enough that Ragnock wanted the most legally literate human in their circle present before the conversation started. That was not reassuring. "Sit," Ragnock said, not unkindly, just with the directness of someone who had a lot to cover. They sat. Ragnock opened the folder in front of him, different from the one at their first meeting, older, the parchment inside visibly more fragile, and placed both hands flat on the surface of the desk. "The heir designation document is clean," he said. "Completely and verifiably clean. Sirius Black executed it correctly under Goblin contract law. The signature is authenticated. The magical imprint is consistent with his recorded core signature from his Gringotts account establishment. There is no procedural irregularity. Calloway and Brightmore's appeal will find nothing." "But," Harry said. Ragnock looked at him. "In reviewing the document and the surrounding archive materials, we found something in the deep estate records that was filed beneath the heir designation. Something that was placed there by Sirius Black himself, approximately 3 months before his death." He reached into the folder and produced a sealed document, sealed with a black family wax that Harry recognized, and set it on the desk between them. He labeled it for Harry when he's ready to understand what he's holding. The room was very quiet. 3 months before he died," Harry said. His voice came out even, which surprised him slightly. "The filing date is January 1995, Ragnock confirmed. "He placed it in the Deep Estate Archive during what we believe was a clandestine visit to Gringotts. There is a record of vault access under a concealment charm, the signature of which matches him. The Ministry had no knowledge of the visit." Ragnock paused. "We believe he knew the estate documentation might be reviewed by hostile parties and wanted this particular document protected in a location that only the confirmed heir could access." Harry looked at the sealed document. Sirius's handwriting on the outside, his quick, slightly slanted script, and the wax seal with the black family star. "What's in it?" Daphne asked. "We don't know," Ragnox said. "The seal is keyed to Harry Potter's magical signature. It will not open for anyone else." Hermione leaned forward. "What do you know about it? What made it significant enough to flag?" Ragnox placed a second document beside the first, this one already open, clearly a Gringotts internal assessment. "The sealed document is enveloped in a specific form of old magic we identified immediately. A revelation ward, but not a standard one. A Black family proprietary variant that has been used historically only once in 1831 by Phineas Nigellus Black." He let that land. In 1831, Phineas Nigellus used this exact ward form to seal a document that was subsequently used to establish the Black family's primary seat on the Wisengamot. The document contained evidence of an original founding charter that predated the Chamber's official records. Another pause. This ward form is used when the contents are intended to shift the legal landscape substantially, not adjust it, shift it. The fire crackled. Harry was looking at the sealed document. 3 months before Sirius fell through the veil, January 1995, which was the year of the Triwizard Tournament, the year Harry was 14. Sirius had been at Grimmauld Place then, restless and bitter and burning with frustrated energy he couldn't use, and he had somehow found time to make a clandestine Gringotts visit and leave his heir a sealed document wrapped in the strongest revelatory ward magic the Black family possessed. Harry had loved Sirius without always understanding him. He was beginning to understand him better now, and it ached in the specific way that posthumous understanding always did. He picked up the document. The seal pulsed once under his fingers, recognizing him. "May I?" he said, to no one in particular. "It's yours," Ragnox said. He broke the seal. The document was 12 pages. Sirius's handwriting throughout, though it shifted across the pages from quick and impatient in the early sections to slower and more deliberate toward the end, as if the writing itself had taken different evenings and different emotional weather. Harry read it through once without speaking. Daphne sat beside him and read it with him, and he didn't mind. Whatever was in here was going to become relevant to both of them within the hour. Hermione was visibly restraining herself from reaching across and reading it simultaneously. He appreciated the restraint. The first 4 pages were personal, serious writing to Harry in the direct, slightly reckless way he'd always communicated, as if the words themselves were moving fast and might get away. "I know I'm not going to be around long enough for this to not matter, so I'm writing it down where it can't be taken from you. I'm sorry in advance for making your life more complicated. Some things you inherit, and most of them are complicated, and the only thing I can do is make sure you have the full picture." The full picture was this? In 1843, 4 years before the marriage contract between Sirius Black and Horatio Greengrass, there had been a different agreement between the two families. Not a marriage contract, a formal declaration of allied intent, executed under the oldest form of wizarding covenant law, which predated even goblin contract authentication. A declaration of this type, Sirius explained in his careening handwriting, was not a contract that could be signed or voided or challenged in the Wisengamot. It was a covenant, a magical binding that existed at the level of the families themselves, in the ancestral ward magic of both bloodlines. The 1847 marriage contract had been a legal formalization of something that already existed magically, not the foundation of the alliance, the surface expression of it. Sirius had found the declaration in 1979, in the summer before he joined the Order the first time, when he'd been going through his grandfather's private papers in a fit of complicated feeling about the family he'd rejected. He hadn't understood what it meant at the time. He'd understood it better, he wrote after Azkaban, after having enough years with nothing to do but think about old magic and what it was actually built to do. The declaration is older than your godfather's memory. It means the alliance between Black and Greengrass isn't something that was agreed to. It's something that was baked into both families' magic at a level that no legal proceeding can reach, because it isn't legal, it's real. A challenge to the contract, even a successful one, couldn't touch the declaration because the declaration is prior to and independent of the contract. A court can void a contract. You cannot void a covenant. The magic doesn't allow it. The magic doesn't even know what that means. The last 4 pages were practical. The location of the original declaration document, Deep Archive Vault 17, behind the 3rd partition, specific instructions for its retrieval. A note to Ragnox's predecessors that had already been delivered, which was apparently why Ragnox's expression currently held the quality of someone finally seeing the last piece of a very long puzzle click into place. And at the very end, 3 lines that were not legal or practical but were serious. "You're going to be brilliant at this, Harry. You were always going to be brilliant at this. You just needed to have something worth being brilliant for. I think you'll find it. When you do, don't be afraid of wanting it. You're allowed to want things. That took me too long to learn and I'm sorry I didn't get the chance to tell you sooner. Harry set the last page down. The room was quiet for a long enough time that Ragnock, who was not given to emotional accommodation, allowed it. Hermione reached across and touched Harry's arm. He nodded once to tell her he was fine, which was not entirely accurate but was accurate enough. Daphne was sitting very still. He looked at her and found her looking at the last page, the 3 personal lines at the bottom, with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Open, unprepared for. She had the face of someone who had just encountered something genuine in an unexpected place and didn't have an immediate response ready, which for Daphne was rare and therefore significant. The declaration, Harry said to Ragnock, his voice was steady. It exists, you've seen it. My predecessor catalogued it in 1986, Ragnock said. At the time, without context for its significance, it was archived as a historical document of academic interest. I reassessed it last night. He folded his hands. It is, as Sirius Black described, a covenant of the most fundamental type, predating the Wisengamot itself. Under covenant law, which still exists, which the Ministry has simply not had occasion to invoke in 200 years, it is beyond the jurisdiction of any legal challenge. Beyond, Hermione said, the legal part of her mind visibly engaging like a machine coming fully online. Not just very difficult to challenge, actually beyond. Covenant law is not statute law, Ragnock said. It is foundational. The Wisengamot was built on top of it. It cannot overrule what it was built on. A pause. To be direct, Lucius Malfoy could file the most technically perfect challenge in the history of the chamber. He could sponsor it with every member simultaneously. Under covenant law, it would have no effect on the actual alliance which exists at a level his challenge cannot reach. The silence this time was different in quality, not the silence of weight but the silence of something enormous settling. Harry looked at Daphne, she looked at him. The same thought, arriving simultaneously. The thing Lucius had been building toward for weeks, the thing that had driven the ward intrusion and the preliminary motion and the escalating letters and the careful cultivation of potential sponsors, it was not just going to fail. It had already failed before it was filed because it was aimed at the wrong thing entirely. He doesn't know about the declaration, Daphne said. No one outside this room does, Ragnock confirmed. And the deep archive in which it was held was not accessible to the access code used during the trespass incident. He never got near it. He's building a case against a contract, Harry said. The contract that's actually just the surface expression of something he can't touch. Yes, Ragnock said. Harry sat back in his chair. He thought about the letter, you understand less than you think, and felt something that was not quite irony but was in the same family. What do we do with this? Daphne asked. She was asking practically, not rhetorically. Do we reveal the declaration publicly before he files? Use it as a preemptive move. If we reveal it publicly before he files, Hermione said, already thinking through the sequence, it becomes part of the public record immediately. He can't pretend he didn't know about it. The challenge becomes not just likely to fail but visibly absurd. He'd be filing against something that everyone with knowledge of covenant law would know was unchallengeable. Which might embarrass him enough that he doesn't file at all, Harry said. Or it might push him to file faster out of desperation before the information is fully disseminated, Daphne said. A cornered man with legal resources and nothing to lose is more dangerous than a patient one with a plan. Harry looked at her. You think we shouldn't reveal it yet? I think we should choose when and how we reveal it very carefully, she said. Ragnock, what's the process for formally entering the declaration into active legal record? It would need to be registered with the Wisengamot's Covenant Office, Ragnock said. A process that requires a formal hearing. The hearing itself becomes public record. Then we request the hearing, Daphne said. Formally, officially, with appropriate notice to all relevant parties including Calloway and Brightmore as the firm of record on the preliminary motion. She looked at Harry. If the hearing is scheduled before he can file his challenge, the challenge walks directly into a room where the declaration is already being entered into active record. He sees it coming and he has no counter because there is no counter. That's, Hermione started. Surgical, Harry finished. Daphne met his eyes. We are not hiding from this anymore. We go to the Wisengamot on our terms with this and we let him watch. I'll schedule the hearing, Ragnock said, with the satisfaction of a goblin completing something very old and very large. 2 weeks, before the appeal window on the preliminary motion closes. Good, Harry said. They stood to leave. Harry picked up Sirius's letter and folded it carefully and put it in his inside pocket against his chest where he would keep it. The 2 weeks before the hearing were not quiet. Calloway and Brightmore, having been formally notified of the Covenant hearing, filed a flurry of procedural objections with the Wisengamot clerk's office, 6 of them in 4 days, each one technically different and substantively the same, all of them aimed at delaying the hearing long enough for the challenge to be filed first. Hermione demolished each objection in writing within 12 hours, working from the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place, with the focused intensity of someone who had found her perfect problem. Lucius, presumably on advice from his legal team, went silent. No owls, no social approaches. The silence had a different quality from ordinary silence. It was a man thinking hard, which was in some ways more concerning than a man acting impulsively. Harry attended the Tuesday Wisengamot session and voted on 2 pieces of legislation: the Creature Rights Amendment extension and a proposed modification to the apparition licensing framework, and did so from the black seat in the second tier, 4th from the left, in full view of everyone present. Daphne attended as proxy for the Greengrass seat, filed her proxy credentials correctly, and sat in the family gallery. Eldest Greengrass was there in person and sat beside her, and if anyone in the chamber had missed the pattern of the solstice gathering, the Tuesday session made it entirely plain. Marchbanks caught Harry in the corridor afterward. "The Covenant hearing," she said without preamble. "Ragnarok briefed me. I want you to understand what you're walking into." "Tell me," Harry said. "The Covenant office hasn't heard an active case in 47 years, she said. "The presiding officer will be Counselor Aveline. She's 81, she's formidable, and she has an absolute commitment to procedural correctness that will not be moved by politics or personality." She looked at him steadily. "The document itself will speak for your case better than anything you could argue, but you will be required to demonstrate your understanding of what you're presenting. She will ask questions, she will expect answers from both of you." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that determine whether the people claiming a covenant understand what a covenant actually is, or whether they've simply found a useful piece of old paper." A pause. "Do you understand what a covenant is?" "Not the legal definition." Actually, Harry thought about the ritual room, the circle, the amber warmth rising through old stone, Daphne's hand, the feel of 2 house magics recognizing each other for the first time. "It's not an agreement," he said. "It's a reality. It exists because the family's magic made it real, not because someone signed it." Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. "Good," she said. "Make sure you say it exactly like that." On the Thursday before the hearing, something happened that Harry had not planned for, and that changed the shape of everything in a way he hadn't seen coming. Which was, he reflected afterward, the problem with planning 3 moves ahead. The universe reserved the right to move diagonally. He was in the library when Creature announced Draco Malfoy. Harry sat with that for a moment, then he said, "Show him in." Draco looked different. He'd looked different at every post-war encounter, because the war had taken something from him that wasn't coming back, and what had grown in its place was quieter and less certain of itself. He was 22 months younger than Harry, and he'd spent the past 2 years working at an apothecary in Hogsmeade under someone else's name while his family's legal status was sorted out, which Harry knew from Ron, who knew from ministry gossip. The arrogance was largely gone. What remained was intelligence and something that looked uncomfortable but honest. "Potter," he said. "Draco," Harry said. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, tea." Draco sat. He looked around the library with the expression of someone recognizing a family space that is no longer his family's. "Number, thank you." A pause. "I heard about the Covenant hearing." "How?" "My father's solicitor left a file on his desk," Draco said. "I visit sometimes. He doesn't know I look." He paused. "He's not well, not physically, but his thinking has become narrow. Everything is about the Black succession now. It's the only thing he has that feels like the old shape of his life." "I know," Harry said. Draco looked at him directly. "He's going to do something at the hearing," he said. "I don't know what specifically. But the solicitor's file had a notation: hearing intervention, primary option. He's planning to appear to intervene formally during the proceedings." "Can he?" Harry asked. "Anyone with established interest in the subject matter of a Covenant hearing can request right of intervention," Draco said. "The presiding officer grants or denies it. His interest is the preliminary motion. It's documented, it's on record, it gives him standing." He paused. "He'll argue that the Covenant cannot be entered into active record while a related preliminary motion is unresolved." "That argument has no legal merit," Harry said. Hermione had already briefed him on this exact scenario. "I know," Draco said, "but the point isn't to win the argument. The point is to create delay. Every procedural pause is another day he can work with." He paused. "He told my mother last week that he would get the Black estate back or ensure no one held it comfortably." He said it with the flat, tired affect of someone who had heard their father say things they couldn't argue with and had decided to stop trying to argue. She told him that was a fool's cause and he should let it go. "They haven't spoken since." Harry was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Draco looked at the table, then at Harry. Because he's my father, he said. And I can't stop him, and I've tried. And because the thing he's doing is going to end badly for him, and I'd rather it end badly on a timeline where it's finished rather than one where it drags out for years and takes the rest of what we have with it. A pause. And because you didn't put me in Azkaban when you could have argued for it at the trials, and I've been carrying that around for 2 years without doing anything about it. Harry looked at him. Draco was many things still that Harry had complicated feelings about. But he was sitting here in this chair in the house that used to be his family's social orbit, being honest in a way that was clearly costing him something. Thank you, Harry said simply. Draco nodded. He stood up, then stopped. She's good, isn't she, Greengrass? Yes, Harry said. She always was, Draco said. She used to run her own study group in 6th year, completely unofficial for the Slytherins who couldn't get to the library because the Carrots were watching it. Transfiguration, defense theory, anything useful. He paused. She did it quietly so nobody got in trouble for it, including her. He looked at Harry. I thought you should know that, since she's, he stopped. Good evening, Potter, he left. Harry sat in the library for a long time afterward, the fire burning low around him, thinking about 6th year and the Carrows and a girl running a quiet, unauthorized study group in the dark, because some things were worth doing even when nobody would ever know about them, because some people were built that way. He got up and went to find her. She was in her usual morning spot, though it was evening now, with a book and her cold tea and her notebook. She looked up when he came in. Draco Malfoy was here, he said. She set the book down. He told her everything, the solicitor's file, the hearing intervention plan, the specifics of what Draco expected his father to attempt. She listened without interrupting, which she always did, her expression moving through calculation and then something else. When he finished, she said, he came here himself. Yes, that was brave, she said, not sentimentally, just accurately. He also told me about the study group, Harry said. 6th year, the one you ran for the Slytherins who couldn't reach the library. She went still. He said you did it quietly so nobody got in trouble, Harry said, including you. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, which was no expression at all, not the composed mask, not the almost smile, not the steady calculation. Just her face, bare and slightly uncertain, the face of someone who had done something private and hadn't expected it to be seen. It was necessary, she said finally. Daphne, there were students who would have failed their exams, she said. Some of them younger than Astoria. It was a practical, it was brave, he said, using her own word back to her. She looked at him, something moved in her face. You do things like that, he said, quietly, without expecting anyone to notice. The wards. The library, the room that growled. He held her gaze. You came into this house and you started taking care of it, and you've never once framed it as taking care of it. It needed doing, she said. Daphne, he said, and his voice had a different quality in it now, quiet and direct, the voice he used when he was being completely honest. I see it. She was silent for a long moment. The fire moved. Outside, London was doing its winter thing, the particular urban dark of December, the orange-gray cloud layer that sat on the city like a held breath. The hearing intervention, she said, not deflecting, just returning to what was real and immediate. But something had shifted. He could feel it. Draco's right that Lucius has standing to request it. Aveline will grant it because she's procedurally correct and he meets the threshold. Can we prepare for it? We can anticipate it, she said. Hermione needs to know tonight, and there's one more thing we should do. She paused. I want to go to the vault. Vault 17, the declaration, she said. I want to see it before the hearing, not as evidence. I want to see what our families made together in 1843 before there was any strategic reason to make it. He understood immediately. She wasn't asking to assess the document, she was asking to know it. There was a difference, and the difference was entirely her. Tomorrow morning, he said. She nodded, then quietly. Harry, he waited. What he wrote, she said, Sirius, at the end of the letter. He hadn't expected her to raise it. He waited. He was right, she said. You're allowed to want things. She said it without looking at him, her eyes on the fire. I thought you should know that she stopped, started again. I'm not unaffected by this, by any of it. A pause. I want you to know that. He sat down in the chair across from her because it seemed like the right thing to do, and they were in the right place for this, the library, the fire, the familiar space of late evenings and honest conversation. I know, he said. I'm not unaffected either. She looked at him then, and whatever she saw seemed to be sufficient, because she nodded once and picked up her book and he picked up his, and they sat together in the warm library while outside the city held its December breath. And what was between them was no longer a thing that needed naming. Vault 17 was at the 7th subterranean level, past the main vault galleries. In a section of Gringotts so old the stone walls had a faint luminescence that Ragnarok told them was a natural property of the rock at that depth rather than anything enchanted. The vault itself was not large. The declaration was behind the third partition, in a sealed case of goblin silver that opened at Harry's touch. The document was on vellum, not paper vellum, the kind made from something specifically prepared, and the script was in a hand so old that the letter forms had shapes Harry had to look at twice before his brain resolved them into readable characters. But the magic on it was immediately palpable, not dramatic. The same quality as the ritual circle, warmth, depth, the feeling of something that had been real for so long that reality had arranged itself around it. Daphne stood beside him and read it with him. He was aware of her stillness, which was different from her usual stillness, not controlled but absorbed. Genuinely moved in the way she was genuinely moved by things when she permitted herself to be. The declaration was 11 lines. 11 lines in old legal wizarding language, stating simply and permanently that the House of Black and the House of Greengrass were allied in magic and in intent, that this alliance was witnessed by the family's combined ward magic at the time of signing, and that no subsequent action by any party, including the families themselves, could dissolve what the magic had made real. It was 183 years old, and it was the most unambiguous document Harry had ever read. At the bottom, below the signatures of Sirius Black and Erasmus Greengrass, was a single additional line in a different hand, added at a different time with the same Revelation Ward signature that Sirius had used. For whoever reads this later, you are always going to find each other. The magic knew before you did. Daphne read that line twice. Then she said very quietly, "Well." "Yeah," Harry said. They stood in the deep vault for a moment. The luminescent stone was warm around them. Something very old was paying quiet attention. "We should go," she said. "We have a hearing to prepare for." "We do," he agreed. She started to move. He caught her hand, not dramatically, not with intention, just the same natural grip as the ritual circle, the same easy hold, and she stopped and looked at their joined hands and then looked at him. "For the hearing," he said. "We walk in together. We always walk in together," she said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned her hand in his until they were properly holding rather than him catching, and they walked out of Vault 17 and up through the deep luminescent levels of Gringotts with the declaration's magic still warm around them. And what waited above, the hearing, Lucius's intervention, the Wizengamot, the reckoning, waited with the patient quality of something that already knew how it was going to go. The night before the hearing, Lucius filed. The formal succession challenge arrived at Harry's solicitor, at Ragnarok's office, and at the Wizengamot clerk's simultaneous at 11 in the evening. The third sponsor was Fairfax, not Pemberton as they'd anticipated, but Fairfax, who had apparently been convinced through the boundary dispute favor after all. The challenge cited Section 7 subsection C, questioned the validity of the heir designation process, and requested an emergency review of the Gringotts contract on grounds of procedural irregularity. Hermione, who received the notification at her Edinburgh flat, had responded in writing before midnight. She contacted the Covenant office to confirm the hearing was unchanged. She contacted Marchbanks. She sent Harry a one-line mirror message at 12:30 that read, "He's panicking. Panicking men make mistakes. See you at 8. Harry sat at the kitchen table with the formal challenge documents and read through them. They were thorough. Lucius had clearly had good legal minds working on this for weeks, and the argument had a coherent internal logic if you didn't know about the declaration, if you didn't know about the ritual, if you were working with only what was publicly visible. The challenge was genuinely well constructed. Daphne came downstairs at 1 in the morning, already having seen the mirror notification, in plain robes with her hair down, which was how Harry had started to understand meant she was thinking rather than performing. She picked up the challenge documents, read them at the kitchen table, set them down. "He filed before he knew what was in Vault 17, she said. "Yes," Harry said. "He thinks this is still about the contract." "Yes," she looked at the documents and then at him. "He has no idea what's coming tomorrow." "No," Harry said. Something crossed her face, not cruelty, not triumphalism, something more like the clean satisfaction of a long equation finally resolving. "Good," she said. She made tea. He cleared the challenge documents to one side. They sat in the kitchen until 2. Going through the hearing preparation one more time, talking through Aveline's likely questions, anticipating Lucius's intervention and how to respond to it, and then talking about other things, about Sirius, about Draco, about Astoria's letter that had arrived that day full of questions about the Wizengamot that she apparently intended to send to Hermione in full but was previewing with Daphne first. At 2:30, Daphne said goodnight and went upstairs. Harry sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes in the quiet house. He thought about Sirius in 1995, making a secret Gringotts visit during the worst year of his imprisonment's aftermath, writing 12 careful pages to a godson who was 14 years old and had no idea that a 183-year-old covenant existed, putting it somewhere safe, trusting the magic to bring it to the surface when the time was right. The magic knew before you did. He finished his tea, went upstairs, and slept better than he had in 2 years. Chapter 6. What ancient houses are built on the Covenant office of the Wizengamot was not the main chamber. It was older than the main chamber, older than the building itself technically, having been the original meeting hall of the first Wizarding Council, before the current structure was built around and on top of it in 1652. The walls were undressed stone, and the ceiling was low enough that the space felt more like the inside of something geological than anything constructed. There were no dramatic chandeliers, no flags of ancient houses, no black marble. Just stone and lamplight and 8 rows of wooden benches arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor that held nothing but a table, 3 chairs, and the particular quality of attention that very old spaces accumulated over centuries of significant events. Counselor Aveline sat at the table. 81, as Marchbanks had said, with white hair pulled back with the severity of someone who had stopped being interested in appearance somewhere around their 6th decade and had never looked back. She had the eyes of a woman who had read more primary legal documents than most wizards knew existed, and they were currently fixed on the door through which Harry and Daphne were about to enter. Harry was aware of the room before he stepped into it. The ward warmth of the combined Black and Greengrass signatures had been adjusting for weeks now, and in this space, old enough, quiet enough, it was immediately perceptible. Like a chord the building could hear. They entered together. The benches were not empty. On the left side, Hermione sat with the Gringotts representative, Ragnarok himself, not a deputy, which was a statement, and their solicitor, a precise woman named Calloway who was absolutely not related to the Calloway of Calloway and Brightmoor, and who had been making that distinction firmly for 20 years. On the right, eldest Greengrass sat with the family's own legal counsel. Behind them in the public gallery, covenant hearings were technically public, a fact Lucius had presumably relied upon and that Harry and Daphne had deliberately not tried to prevent, were Marchbanks, Ogden Vance, and approximately 40 other people whose presence indicated that word had moved through the wizarding world's relevant circles faster than anyone had officially announced. Ron and Astoria were sitting together in the back row. Ron had his formal Auror robes on, which meant he'd probably come straight from work, and Astoria had her arms folded and the expression of someone who fully intended to understand every word of the proceedings. Hermione had probably briefed her. Hermione had probably briefed Ron too, though Ron's expression suggested his briefing had been more overview than detail, which was how he preferred it. Lucius Malfoy was in the gallery, far right, seated alone. He was wearing robes that cost as much as most people's monthly income and holding himself with the rigorous self-possession of a man who had decided that composure was the only dignity left available to him. He did not look at Harry. He looked at Aveline and the table and the door through which the declaration would eventually enter the room. Daphne's hand was at Harry's elbow, not holding, just present, a point of contact, and then they were separating to take their seats at the central table, and the hearing began. Aveline did not waste time on preamble. This hearing is convened under Covenant Law, Section 1, to consider the formal registration of a declaration of allied intent between House Black and House Greengrass, originally executed in 1843, and to assess its current validity and legal standing. She looked at Harry, then Daphne, with the comprehensive attention of someone running an assessment in real time. I will ask questions. I expect complete answers. I will not be managed, directed, or strategically handled by either party, their representatives, or anyone in this room. A pause specifically weighted toward the gallery. I have been doing this for 47 years and I know what all of those things look like. Understood, Harry said. She looked at him. Mr. Potter, you are the current head of House Black. Yes. How long have you held that designation? Formally, since I completed the estate settlement process approximately 14 months ago. The heir designation itself was made by Sirius Black in January 1995. And you were aware of the declaration prior to the discovery of your godfather's sealed letter? When did you first become aware of it? 8 days ago. Aveline made a note. Miss Greengrass. You are the heir formal of House Greengrass, acting under betrothal designation. Yes, Daphne said. Was the Greengrass family aware of the declaration's existence prior to the discovery of the sealed letter? A pause. My father confirmed when I asked him directly after the Gringotts meeting 8 days ago that a document of alliance had existed in family oral history, referenced in passing in his grandfather's private papers, but its specific nature and legal standing were not known to the living family. It was referred to historically as the old understanding, without elaboration. She held Aveline's gaze. We did not know what we had. Aveline said, which Harry was beginning to understand was her version of approval. She opened the case before her, the goblin silver case from Vault 17, and placed the declaration on the table between them. The old vellum with its 11 lines and the luminescent quality that 183 years of covenant magic gave a document. The room went very quiet. Even the stone seemed to hold itself still. This document, Aveline said, is the instrument you seek to register. Yes, Harry said, before I hear the formal case for registration, I want to understand something that is not in any document. She looked between them. A covenant is not a contract. A contract is an agreement between parties. A covenant is a reality created by the participants' combined magical intent. The legal question is secondary to the magical one. The law simply acknowledges what the magic has made true. Her eyes were steady. Tell me what the magic has made true, not legally, actually. The room had the quality of a held breath. Harry looked at Daphne. She looked at him. Some communications happened in the gap between two people's eyes when they had spent enough honest time together. He spoke first. The declaration was made in 1843. But the ritual integration, the process by which our house's magic formally recognized each other, we completed that 2 weeks ago. He paused. In the ritual room at Grimmauld Place, a Black family alliance space that I didn't know existed until I found it by following a draft in the East Corridor. He saw something almost move in Aveline's expression. The declaration is the foundation. What we did in the ritual room is the same thing expressed in present tense. What did you feel during the ritual? Aveline asked. Not what happened. What did you feel? Harry thought about it honestly. Like something resolving, he said. Like a chord that had been almost sounded for a long time finally landing. The house felt different afterward. The wards, I can speak to the wards, Daphne said. The Black and Greengrass ward signatures integrated within the hour following the ritual. The integration was confirmed independently by Lydia Pemberton at the Solstice Gathering. She identified it as an active covenant integration without being told what to look for. She paused. It's not theoretical, counselor. You can feel it in this room right now if you're attending to it. Aveline was quiet for a moment. Then she placed one hand flat on the table, not on the declaration beside it, and closed her eyes for approximately 4 seconds. When she opened them, something in her expression had changed, not dramatically. Just in the way that someone's expression changes when they have confirmed something they suspected. Yes, she said simply. I can. She withdrew her hand. The magical evidence is compelling and consistent. I have 2 legal questions and then we will proceed to the registration motion. She turned to the gallery. Before I hear from any party seeking intervention, I will complete my questions. It was directed clearly at Lucius. His solicitor, a sharp-faced man named Ingram, was already half rising. He sat back down. Aveline returned to Harry. Mr. Potter, the preliminary challenge filed yesterday by Lord Malfoy's legal team. Do you wish to respond to it formally, or do you consider the declaration's registration sufficient to address its claims? Harry had thought about how to answer this. He talked about it with Daphne and Hermione both. The challenge is aimed at the contract, he said. The contract between House Black and House Greengrass executed through Gringotts. I don't dispute that a challenge to the contract is procedurally possible. He paused. But the contract is the legal surface expression of a covenant that predates the Wisengamot by decades. Challenging the surface expression doesn't affect what's underneath. It's like arguing about the paint on a wall while the wall itself is unaffected. He held Aveline's gaze. The challenge can proceed if Lucius wants to spend his legal resources on it. It won't change anything. Aveline looked at him for a long moment. You're not seeking to have the challenge dismissed. I'm seeking to have the declaration registered, Harry said. What Lucius does with his own proceedings is his business. Something moved in Aveline's face that might on a different person have been called amusement. Final question, Miss Greengrass. You are the heir formal of your house, but you are not yet the head. Your father is. He is present in this room. I want to hear from you why this registration should be made on your standing rather than his. Daphne was ready for it. Because the declaration is generational, she said. It was made not by heads of house specifically, but by the families. The magic that authenticated it was the combined ward signature of both bloodlines, not just their leadership. As heir formal with active ritual integration, my standing in this covenant is equal to any head of house. The magic doesn't observe hierarchy, it observes reality. She paused. My father is present and I speak with his full knowledge and sanction, but the covenant doesn't require his sanction, it requires mine. Aveline looked at her, then she looked at Aldous Greengrass. Aldous gave a single, composed nod. All right, Aveline said. She closed the case before her. I will hear the intervention request. Ingram, Lucius's solicitor, was good. Harry gave him that. He rose with the smooth professionalism of someone who had prepared for this from multiple angles and was going to be precise regardless of how the room felt about his client. He cited Section 7, subsection C cleanly. He presented the standing argument that the preliminary motion constituted documented legal interest, that the appeal to the Gringotts heir designation document was unresolved, and that entering the declaration into active record while a related legal proceeding was pending created a prejudicial situation that the Covenant Office should refuse to compound. It was a good argument. Harry watched Marchbanks watching Ingram and saw in her expression the professional acknowledgement of solid work. Then Hermione stood up. Harry had seen Hermione in a great many situations over 20 years. He had seen her duel, negotiate, argue, comfort, research, plan, and improvise. He had never quite seen her do this, stand in a formal legal setting with 6 inches of notes she wasn't going to need because she'd memorized everything and knew from memory alone that she was standing on completely solid ground. Counselor Aveline, she said, the intervention request rests on a single premise, that the preliminary motion and the covenant hearing are legally related proceedings. I'd like to address that premise directly. She opened one of her notes, not because she needed to but because juries, even Wisengamot ones, trusted people who had documents. The preliminary motion challenges the Gringotts contract executed 14 months ago. The covenant hearing concerns a declaration executed in 1843. These are not legally related proceedings because they concern different instruments from different centuries with different legal frameworks. The preliminary motion operates under statute law. The declaration operates under covenant law. These are not branches of the same legal tree. They are different trees. Ingram started to respond. Aveline held up a hand. He stopped. Continue, Aveline said to Hermione. Counsel for the intervening party argues that the proceedings are related because both concern the House Black and House Greengrass alliance, Hermione said. But by that logic any proceeding that mentions either family would be related to any other proceeding mentioning either family. That's not a legal principle, that's a phrase. She set down her notes. The declaration predates the contract by 4 years. The contract was executed to formalize legally what the covenant had already established magically. They move in one direction from the covenant outward, not reciprocally. A challenge to the contract cannot therefore affect the covenant, and a covenant proceeding has no procedural obligation to wait for a contract challenge to resolve. She paused. The intervention request should be denied because its premise is incorrect. Ingram said, Counselor, the question of whether the two instruments are legally related is precisely the kind of determination that requires. It's not a difficult determination, Aveline said. Ingram stopped. Aveline looked at him with the patience of someone who had heard a great many creative legal arguments and was not interested in arguing about their quality in public. The intervention request is denied. The declaration proceeds to registration motion. In the gallery Lucius moved. Not dramatically, he didn't stand, didn't speak. But something shifted in his posture, a minute adjustment, and Harry, who was watching, saw it. The realization arriving not all at once but in stages, the way cold water entered a space, first the awareness that the room had changed temperature, then the understanding of why, then the recognition that there was no warmer room to move to. He had filed his challenge last night. He had done it expecting to walk into this hearing and find a contract proceeding. He had found a covenant. He had been building his case against the paint on a wall. The registration motion itself was procedurally straightforward, which was mildly anticlimactic after the hearing's first hour, and which Harry found appropriate. The largest things he'd learned, often resolved into the simplest final steps. Ragnarok presented the Gringotts authentication of the declaration, 4 pages of goblin silver-sealed verification that Aveline read in full silence while the room waited. Hermione presented the legal brief, establishing the declaration standing under covenant law. The Greengrass solicitor provided the family's formal acknowledgement. The Covenant Office clerk recorded everything with the steady industry of a man who understood that history moved at a pace that suited it regardless of what the observers wanted. Aveline read the declaration itself, all 11 lines, aloud in the old wizarding legal English which in her precise delivery carried more weight than Harry had expected. The room was completely still. The words moved through the old stone space and found a quality in it that the same words spoken anywhere else would not have had. Then she looked up. The declaration of allied intent between House Black and House Greengrass, executed 1843, is confirmed as a valid covenant instrument under Covenant Law Section 1. She pressed her seal to the registration document. It is entered into active legal record as of this date. Its standing is covenantal, which is to say prior to and independent of any statute law instrument, including but not limited to contracts, challenges, motions, or appeals currently or subsequently filed in any Wisengamot forum. She set down her seal. This concludes the Covenant Office hearing. The record is closed. She stood. Everyone in the room stood. Aveline gathered her documents, nodded once to Harry, once to Daphne, and walked out through the door behind the central table. The Covenant clerk followed. The room began its slow, murmuring exhale. Harry became aware that Daphne was looking at him. He turned to find her expression doing several things simultaneously, relief and satisfaction and something more personal than either of those, all moving beneath the surface of her composed face like weather moving under ice, visible if you knew how to look. He had learned how to look. Done, she said. Done, he agreed. From across the room, Hermione caught his eye. The look on her face was the one she got when something she had worked very hard on came out exactly right. The pure, clean satisfaction of a solution correctly reached. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. He nodded back. Ron, from the back bench, gave him a thumbs up that was completely undignified and entirely welcome. Lucius left the gallery without speaking to anyone. Harry watched him go, the long-backed figure in the expensive robes, moving toward the exit with the careful deliberateness of a man maintaining his dignity through an act of sustained will. At the door he paused, and for a moment Harry thought he was going to turn. He didn't. He walked out. Harry thought about what Draco had said. Everything is about the Black succession now. It's the only thing he has that feels like the old shape of his life, and felt something that was not quite sympathy and was not quite its opposite. Lucius Malfoy had built himself a world with a specific architecture, and that world had collapsed, and what he'd been doing for months was trying to find one load-bearing wall still standing that he could rebuild from. There had been a version of events where that impulse was almost understandable. But the version of events they were actually in was the one where Harry was sitting in a room with a registered covenant in the active legal record, and Lucius was walking out through a door, and the wall he'd been trying to reach had turned out to be something he couldn't touch. The formal challenge filed last night would make its way through the system and fail, because Hermione had already prepared the response and it was, in her own assessment, airtight. Ingram would probably advise Lucius to withdraw it before it failed publicly. Whether Lucius took that advice was his own business. Marchbanks caught Harry in the corridor outside the Covenant office, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who had a great deal to do and was fitting this into a specific window. That was well managed, she said. Hermione managed most of it, Harry said honestly. Miss Granger managed the legal argument, Marchbanks said. You managed the room, different skills, both necessary. She looked at him with the assessing gaze he'd grown accustomed to. The Black seat next Tuesday. The amendment on the extended tracking legislation is coming to vote. It's going to be close. Which way should I vote? Harry said. I wouldn't presume to tell you, she said. But I'd suggest reading Section 4C carefully and forming your own view because Section 4C is where the actual problem is and most members won't have found it. She moved off. Harry filed Section 4C of the extended tracking legislation as something he was going to spend his Sunday on. Vance passed him with a nod that was warm by her standards. Ogden pumped his hand again. Pemberton, who had watched the entire hearing from the third row on the aisle with complete attention, stopped at the door and looked at him. For what it's worth, she said, I would not have been the third sponsor. I want you to know that. I know, Harry said, thank you. She looked at him for a moment. Your godfather would have been in that seat 20 years ago if things had gone differently, she said. I knew him slightly before. He was infuriating. A pause. You're somewhat less infuriating. I consider this an improvement. And she walked out. Harry stood in the corridor and thought that was probably the nicest thing Pemberton had ever said about anyone. Astoria was in the corridor too, because of course she was, having navigated her way from the back gallery to the hallway with the instinctive efficiency of someone who always found the fastest route between 2 points. She was talking to Ron, who had the expression of someone being briefed very quickly on something he hadn't quite absorbed in the room. She saw Harry coming and said, That was brilliant. Aveline is extraordinary. Did you know she wrote the definitive commentary on Covenant Law in 1987? It's the only comprehensive modern text. I read it last week. You read it last week, Harry said. Hermione told me about the hearing Monday, Astoria said. I had a week. As if this was obvious, she looked at Harry with clear, warm eyes. Is it over, the Malfoy part? Mostly, he said. The challenge will fail. He'll probably withdraw it. Good, she said. He's made my sister tired. I don't like things that make my sister tired. Harry looked at her. She doesn't show it. I know, Astoria said. That's how I know she's tired. When things she cares about get difficult, she gets very precise. She paused. She's been very precise for weeks. It was such an accurate observation and delivered with such casual love that Harry felt something shift in his chest. Daphne had a person who read her exactly right and had been reading her exactly right for years, and that person was 17 and currently rebriefing Ron Weasley on the finer points of Covenant law in a Wisengamot corridor. She's not tired anymore, Harry said. Not about this. Astoria looked at him. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy something she'd been checking. She nodded. Good, she said again with an entirely different weight on the word. The lunch happened at Grimmauld Place. Creature, who had apparently decided weeks ago that significant days deserved significant food, had prepared things that no one had asked for and everyone needed, and the kitchen table was entirely too small for the number of people around it, which was fine and was in fact exactly right. Eldest Greengrass at Harry's kitchen table was a different man than Eldest Greengrass at Gringotts, less formal, more himself, the measured quality relaxing into warmth in the way of someone who had been holding a specific tension for months and was now allowing it to release. He talked about the Declaration, what the old understanding had meant in his grandfather's stories, and what it meant now to have it real and registered and beyond reach. His voice had a quality in it when he said beyond reach that told Harry everything about what the past 2 years had cost him. Cressida Greengrass was there too. Quieter than anyone but present in the specific way of someone who had chosen to be present rather than finding reasons not to be. She ate Creature's food and asked Hermione one careful question about the legal brief and listened to the answer with serious attention. She didn't speak much to Harry directly, but twice across the table their eyes met and she held the gaze not warmly, not yet, but honestly. Without fear. That was sufficient. He could work with honest. Neville had arrived at some point because he and Ron had apparently been texting back and forth about the hearing on the modified Muggle mobile phones Hermione had persuaded the relevant ministry department to make magically functional, and Neville had decided that a significant day called for showing up. He brought excellent biscuits from a Hogsmeade bakery and sat at the end of the table talking to Aldous about herbology, which turned into a genuinely fascinating exchange about the Greengrass estate's ornamental grounds and several plants that Neville was professionally interested in. Harry watched Aldous light up about his garden with the particular enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for an appreciative audience and thought, this is good. This specific thing right now at this table, this is good. He was in the room he was in. Daphne had been right about that, he was in it. Later, after the table was cleared and the conversation had moved to the sitting room and Creature was doing something contentedly loud in the kitchen, and the afternoon was getting long and amber through the windows, Harry found himself on the back steps of Grimmauld Place with a cup of tea, looking at the garden. The garden he kept meaning to fix and hadn't. The November bare stretch of London earth behind an old house, 2 or 3 things still green that had no business being green in December but were making their own decision about it. He heard the door open behind him. Daphne sat down on the step beside him with her own tea, close enough that their arms were touching, which was a degree of proximity that had arrived gradually and was now simply where they were. Astoria told Ron she'd all him the Marchbanks commentary on Covenant law, she said. I know. He's going to read it because he won't want her to think he didn't. He might actually find it interesting. He might, Harry agreed. It would not be the strangest thing that happened this year. She looked at the garden, the comfortable quiet that they'd been building for months settled around them. I want to fix the garden, Harry said. I know, she said. You've said that 4 times. I mean actually fix it, in the spring. I'll help, she said. I know what should go where for the ward integration. The Greengrass estate uses plants with specific magical properties along the boundary lines. It reinforces the outer wards naturally. We could do something similar here. A pause. Neville could advise. He'd love that, Harry said. He'd probably volunteer before you finished the sentence. She smiled. A proper one, not the almost smile, not the small private one, a real smile that reached her eyes and changed the whole shape of her face. The kind she was beginning to produce with more frequency and less deliberateness, as if the habit of containing herself was relaxing one layer at a time. He looked at her. She was looking at the garden, and the December light was doing something honest to her face, and the past 3 months were in the space between them. The contract, the ritual, the late evenings, the challenge, the hearing, all of it, and also something that had nothing to do with any of that and had been happening quietly in the background of all of it, in the library at 2 in the morning, in the kitchen over cold tea in Vault 17 with the luminescent stone. Daphne, he said. She turned to look at him. He didn't strategize this, didn't calculate it, just said, "I think I've been falling in love with you since the cafe in Diagon Alley." She was quiet for a moment. He waited. "The almond cake," she said. "Something like that," he said. "The almond cake, the room that growled, the ward configuration, the study group in 6th year that I wasn't supposed to know about." He paused. "The way you say things exactly once and mean them completely." She was looking at him with that open, unprepared face, the one he'd first seen in Vault 17, the one that came out when she encountered something genuine in an unexpected place. "I told you I wasn't unaffected," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm being more specific." A pause. "Since the ritual room," she said, "for me. Since the ritual room specifically, though I suspect it started before that and I wasn't ready to call it what it was." He held her gaze. "And now I'm ready," she said. He kissed her. She kissed him back, which she did with the same focused, honest precision she brought to everything else, which meant it was not tentative and not performed and not complicated by anything external. Just the two of them on the back steps of an old house in December, tea getting cold beside them, the ward warmth of 2 integrated house magics quiet and steady around them. When they separated, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before and immediately wanted to see again, open and certain at once, the face of someone who has arrived somewhere they chose to go and found it exactly as good as they'd hoped. "The garden," she said. "In the spring," he agreed. "We should plan it properly." "We will." Neville's advice notwithstanding, "I have specific ideas about the south boundary." He laughed. "Of course you do. Do you want to hear them?" "Absolutely," he said, and meant it completely, and she began to tell him, and the afternoon held its amber light, and the city moved around the old house. And the house held what it held: the registered covenant, the integrated wards, the library with 2 sets of notes on the same table, the kitchen that smelled of creatures cooking, the ritual room with its warm stone circle, the garden waiting for spring, all of it real. None of it accidental, all of it chosen. 3 weeks later, Calloway and Brightmoor formally withdrew the succession challenge on behalf of their client. The withdrawal was filed quietly on a Friday afternoon with no accompanying statement. The clerk recorded it. The file closed. Hermione sent Harry a mirror message that said, "It's done," 2 words which from Hermione meant she was too satisfied to need more. Harry showed Daphne the message across the breakfast table. She read it, set the mirror down, and picked up her tea. "What does he do now?" she asked, not with concern, just with the thoughtful quality of someone considering an equation that had resolved. "Something else," Harry said. "Something smaller. He's lost this particular thing and he knows it. He'll find another angle eventually, men like Lucius always do, but it won't be this angle." He drank his coffee. "And when he does, we'll deal with it." "We will," she said. "We're fairly good at dealing with things," he said. She gave him the real smile. "We are," she said, "though I want it noted that I do a disproportionate share of the ward maintenance. I notice the wards, appreciating them is not the same as maintaining them. I cleared the south garden bed last Tuesday. You moved 3 rocks and then came inside and claimed you'd cleared the south garden bed. Those were large rocks, Harry, Daphne." She pressed her lips together against the smile, lost the fight, and shook her head. "Eat your breakfast." He ate his breakfast. Outside the kitchen window, the December morning was cold and clear, and the garden, the unmistakably not yet fixed garden, was there beyond the frost-edged glass, waiting for spring and all the specific plans she had for it, and he was entirely, undefensively happy, which was a thing he'd stopped remembering he was allowed to be. He was, it turned out, very allowed. The Wisengamot session on Tuesday went 4 hours and covered 3 pieces of legislation. Harry voted on all 3, having read Section 4C of the extended tracking legislation twice on Sunday, and formed a firm opinion about the problem Marchbanks had mentioned, which he then voted accordingly on, which put him on the same side as Marchbanks and Vance and 3 other members, and opposite a coalition of 8 who'd clearly missed Section 4C entirely. The amendment passed by 6 votes. In the corridor afterward, Marchbanks said nothing to him directly. She walked past, and as she passed, she gave him a nod that contained, in its angle and its brevity and its complete lack of excess, precisely the amount of approval she thought the situation warranted. It was enough. It was more than enough. He walked out of the Wisengamot building into the cold December street and sent Daphne a mirror message that said, "Section 4C turned out to be exactly what Marchbanks implied it was. She responded within a minute, of course it did, she's never wrong about those things. Did you read the supplementary brief I left on the study desk? Yes, all of it, most of it. A pause, then Harry, the footnotes were very long. The footnotes were the important part, I know. I'm reading them tonight. Good, dinner's at 7, creatures doing the lamb, I'll be there. He pocketed the mirror and walked toward the Flu station, past the rebuilt atrium with its gold motto, past the ministry workers moving through the tail end of their day, through the familiar London air of December, and felt the ward warmth of Grimmauld Place, their house, the integrated warmth of two houses. Magic settled into every stone, even from here. Felt it the way you felt a compass pointing, the way you knew in the body rather than the mind which direction home was. He went home. In the end, what the ancient houses were built on was not stone, though they had plenty of that, not gold, though they had plenty of that too. Not legal instruments or goblin-sealed contracts or covenant law documents entered into active record on a December morning, in a room that was older than the building it was inside. Not even the old magic that ran beneath all those things like water beneath bedrock. What they were built on was simpler and harder to come by. Two people walking into a room they didn't choose to be in, and choosing over and over in every small and significant decision that followed, to be in it anyway. To fix the things that needed fixing, to say the true things once and mean them completely, to stand in the ritual circle and hold on. The magic had known before they did. But they had arrived at knowing eventually that in the end was sufficient. That was, in fact, the whole of it.